Marcus Wilson thought this vacation was about family, not survival. On a quiet beach morning, a stranger's 911 call turned their dream getaway into a police standoff. She claimed they were suspicious. She didn't know he was the FBI's youngest black field chief. What began as prejudice would explode into a national reckoning, and a fight that could change the law forever. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The Wilson family's first morning at Ocean View Resort felt like a page from a glossy travel brochure. The sun had just crept above the horizon, spilling molten gold across the rippling surface of the Atlantic. The air was crisp but warm, carrying the faint scent of sea salt and coconut oil, drifting from the hotel cabanas. Marcus Wilson stepped onto the wooden deck of their beachside rental, his bare feet pressing against the sun-warmed planks. Beside him, his wife Danielle held 2 steaming cups of coffee, hers sweet and creamy, his black and strong. Behind them, their teenage children, Ayanna and Caleb, raced to see who could get to the sand first, their laughter cutting through the quiet hum of early morning waves. For a moment, Marcus let himself believe that this trip would be exactly what they needed. A break from the grind, from the headlines, from the heavy shadow of his work. He had spent over 2 decades in federal service, climbing through ranks that weren't built for men who looked like him, until he became the youngest black FBI field chief in state history. And yet here, on this stretch of shoreline, he wasn't Chief Wilson. He was just dad, husband, man enjoying the ocean breeze. They unloaded suitcases from the rental car, rolling them across the smooth sand-colored driveway toward the airy whitewashed beach house. Inside, the decor was bright and coastal. Pale blues, driftwood frames, shelves lined with shells collected by guests long gone. Danielle hummed to herself as she unpacked sunscreen and beach towels. Caleb sprawled across the couch, flipping through resort activity brochures, while Ayanna was already planning Instagram shots with the perfect light. It was the kind of morning that made you forget the world could be cruel. Until the stares began. At first, Marcus barely noticed them. A couple by the pool glancing over, a group of older men pausing their conversation. But then it became unmistakable. Eyes lingering a fraction too long. Conversations halting mid-sentence, as they walked past. A mother pulling her toddler closer when Ayanna reached for a beach ball that had rolled her way. Danielle's smile thinned. "Ignore it," she whispered when their eyes met. Marcus nodded, though the familiar heaviness began to settle in his chest. It was a weight he knew too well. The knowledge that no matter the suit you wore, the title you carried, the service you gave, some people saw only your skin first. A cluster of lounge chairs occupied by white vacationers shifted as the Wilsons passed, the occupants subtly moving their belongings to the far side. One woman, in her late 50s with perfectly set hair and a crisp white visor, didn't bother with subtlety. She turned her head deliberately, letting her gaze sweep over Marcus, then Danielle, then the kids, with a frown that seemed etched into her face. Her name, though the Wilsons didn't yet know it, was Carol Whitmore, a longtime resident of a wealthy Florida suburb, a woman who prided herself on keeping her neighborhood safe, a woman who had a history of making calls when she thought something didn't look right. Her eyes tracked them like a hawk's. When Danielle spread a blanket on the sand, Carol's expression shifted. Not curious, not confused, but disapproving, as though the very sight of their family here disrupted some unspoken order. She leaned toward the woman next to her, speaking in a tone just loud enough to carry, though the words were a blur beneath the hiss of the waves. The other woman's eyes darted to the Wilsons, then quickly away. Ayanna noticed. "Dad, people are staring," she murmured, tugging at her beach cover-up. Marcus crouched beside her, adjusting the straps of her sandals. "We came here to enjoy ourselves. Let's do that," he said softly, keeping his voice steady. But inside he felt the first prickle of irritation. Not for himself, he'd long since learned to wear armor against this, but for his children, who deserved a day untouched by this brand of small, cutting hostility. The Wilsons tried to focus on their morning plans. Caleb was determined to rent paddleboards. Danielle had spotted a beachfront cafe serving tropical smoothies. They walked toward the pier, the sun warming their shoulders, the promise of saltwater adventures ahead. And still, the feeling of being watched lingered. At the corner of the pier's boardwalk, Marcus paused, sensing movement. Carol had left her chair. She now stood near the resort's concierge desk, glancing back toward the family between short bursts of conversation with the attendant. When she caught Marcus's eye, She didn't look away. Instead, she lifted her chin, her expression cool, almost calculating. Danielle followed his gaze and sighed. She's not going to let this go, she muttered. Maybe she's just curious, Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The kids ran ahead, chasing seagulls, and Marcus allowed himself to breathe again. But as they reached the row of paddleboard rentals, a shadow fell across the sand. Carol had followed them. This time she was holding her phone screen lit, camera pointed casually but unmistakably in their direction. Marcus's jaw tightened. Let's just get the boards, he told Danielle, pulling out his wallet. The vendor, a young man with a tan and mirrored sunglasses, handed over life jackets without comment, but his eyes flicked past Marcus to where Carol stood. She was tapping her phone now, speaking into it in short, clipped bursts. Marcus tried to tune it out, the sound of Ayana laughing as she wobbled on her paddleboard, Caleb shouting about spotting a jellyfish, but the low murmur of Carol's voice carried on the wind. Phrases like, doesn't seem like they belong, and acting suspicious, threaded their way through the crash of the surf. Danielle met Marcus's eyes. She didn't have to say the words. They both knew. Carol lowered her phone for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she studied Marcus like a puzzle she intended to solve. Her lips curled into the faintest trace of a smirk, and then, without breaking that cold, assessing gaze, she lifted the phone to her ear again. Her voice was clearer this time, the words slicing through the warm morning air. Yes, I'd like to report something suspicious. Carol turned away from the shore, pacing slowly, as she began describing the Wilson family to whoever was on the other end of the line, her tone careful, deliberate, and laced with the kind of false concern that had destroyed lives before. Carol's phone hovered just below her chin for a moment, her thumb grazing the call button, as if she were savoring the power that came with it. Her fingers trembled, not with fear but with an electric, almost gleeful anticipation. She pressed it. 911. What's your emergency? The calm, clipped voice of the dispatcher filled her ear. Carol's tone shifted instantly, smoothing into one of manufactured worry. I'm at the Ocean View Resort, she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. And there's a family here acting suspicious. They're aggressive. From where she stood, she could see Marcus and Danielle guiding their kids toward the rental, their laughter carrying lightly on the breeze. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't flinch at the contrast between her words and reality. I think they might have weapons, she added, each word slow, deliberate. The lie dropped from her lips with the ease of someone who had rehearsed such lines before. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. You believe they are armed? Carol hesitated, just long enough for the implication to sink in, then answered, I can't see anything, but the way they're acting, it's threatening. They've been watching people, moving around like they're scoping the place. Across the boardwalk, Caleb was trying to teach Iana the rules to a card game they'd just bought from the gift shop, the two of them laughing over a disagreement about who cheated first. Inside the beach rental, Danielle knelt beside the coffee table, unpacking a board game for them to play together before lunch. Marcus sat on the couch, leaning back with a rare softness in his expression. A man allowing himself, if only for an hour, to set down the weight he always carried. But Carol's voice painted a different picture. They've been pacing around, whispering. The man is huge, very intimidating. I'm not the only one who's uncomfortable. The statement, like everyone before it, was laced with poison, disguised as civic duty. Can you describe them for me? The dispatcher asked. Carol's gaze traveled over the family, as though memorizing a police sketch. Black male, mid-40s, muscular build, wearing a dark t-shirt and shorts. Black female, late 30s, braided hair, long dress. Two teenagers, maybe 14 and 16. The way she spoke their physical features, skin tone first, every time, made her bias unmistakable to anyone who was listening closely. Stay on the line, the dispatcher instructed. We're sending units now. Stay somewhere safe. The words hit her like a shot of adrenaline. Safe. From what? From who? The truth was, Carol had never once felt unsafe. She felt entitled. Entitled to decide who belonged here, and who didn't. Entitled to use the system to enforce her comfort. While she leaned against the railing, watching the Wilsons through narrowed eyes, the dispatcher was relaying the call over the radio. Possible armed threat. Ocean View Resort. Family of 4 described as African American. Units proceed with caution. The phrasing, a mix of uncertainty and danger, was enough to send adrenaline through every officer's veins. The first alert went to the nearest patrol cars, but the mention of possible weapons triggered a higher response. 2 more units were dispatched. Then a supervisor. Carol adjusted her visor and took a step back, her phone still pressed to her ear as if she needed the dispatcher's voice for courage. From her vantage point, she could see Danielle setting out little bowls of snacks on the coffee table, Marcus leaning forward to shuffle cards for the game. Ayana's head was thrown back in laughter, Caleb teasing her mercilessly about losing. It should have been a postcard moment, a family making memories. Instead, it was about to become the center of a coordinated police response. The dispatcher asked, "Are they doing anything right now that suggests immediate danger?" Carol paused, eyes narrowing again. "They keep looking toward the road, like they're waiting for someone. And I think the man's hiding something under the table." Under the table, Marcus had just placed the box lid from the board game on the floor to keep it from sliding. The call ended shortly after, with the dispatcher instructing her to stay put until officers arrived. Carol tucked her phone into her purse and sat back down on her lounge chair, a small, satisfied smile tugging at her lips. Inside the rental, the Wilson family was blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding just outside their windows. Danielle leaned across the table to grab another deck of cards, bumping Marcus's knee. "You always get competitive when we play these," she teased. "That's because I always win," Marcus replied, smirking, though his eyes softened as he watched his children. This, the laughter, the light, the absence of weight, was why he had booked this trip. To give them a week where the only battles were over. Who got the last pancake, not who got the last word in a boardroom. Ayana rolled her eyes dramatically at one of Caleb's moves. "You are so cheating." "Am not," Caleb shot back, grinning. The moment was so normal, so unremarkable, that it became extraordinary in its peace. And yet just beyond the walls of that beach rental, engines were starting. Radios were crackling. The first police SUV pulled out from the station 2 miles away, followed by another from a nearby traffic patrol. The mention of possible armed suspects meant they wouldn't approach lightly. Training dictated they arrive ready to control the scene, and that readiness often meant weapons drawn before questions asked. Back at the resort, Carol adjusted her position to get a better view of the street. She didn't want to miss the arrival. She wanted to see how quickly her call could turn a quiet vacation morning into something else entirely. She imagined the officers pulling up, the family being questioned, maybe even escorted away. She told herself it was about safety, about doing the right thing, but deep down there was a sharper, uglier satisfaction curling in her chest. She wasn't ready for what was about to happen next. A low rumble cut through the sound of the waves, the distinct growl of multiple engines, accelerating down the road. Marcus looked up from the board game, frowning. "Do you hear that?" Danielle tilted her head. At first it could have been traffic from the highway. But then came the faint whine of sirens. They were getting louder. Fast. Iana froze mid-move, eyes darting to the window. "That's a lot of sirens," she said quietly. Caleb got up to peek through the blinds. "There's like 3 cop cars coming down the road," he said, his voice tight with uncertainty. Marcus's instincts, the ones that had kept him alive in high-stakes situations for decades, flared instantly. He set the cards down slowly, his mind running through possibilities. They weren't expecting anyone. They hadn't done anything wrong. And yet the sound was unmistakable. Danielle's brow furrowed as the sirens grew deafening. "Marcus," she said, her voice low, "they're coming here." The sirens swelled like a tide, and Marcus felt the old muscle memory, the one that tightened his chest right before an operation, take hold. He steadied his breath, counting in 4s the way he'd learned at Quantico, but the sound dragged him somewhere older than training. Older than the bureau. It took him back to cracked sidewalks and hot summers where asphalt shimmered like a mirage, to a boy who learned too early how to disappear in plain sight. He had grown up on Elm and Porter, in a neighborhood carved by railroad tracks that might as well have been border walls. On one side sat manicured lawns and a brick library, with stained glass windows. On the other, corner stores behind plexiglass and a bus stop where time moved slow. His mother, Ruth, worked 2 jobs, her hands always smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. His father, Lionel, carried a lunch pail to the municipal garage and kept faded baseball cards in his wallet. Reminders, he said, that some dreams outlive the men who make them. The summer Marcus turned 11, a new patrolman was assigned to their beat, and every kid learned his rule: don't run, even if you're late, especially if you're late. He didn't run, not even on the day the corner store owner accused him of slipping a candy bar into his pocket. He can still feel the press of the officer's palm against the hood of the squad car. The heat searing through his cotton t-shirt, the way the metal groaned under weight, never meant for a child. "I didn't take anything," he'd said, voice so steady he surprised himself. The candy sat in plain view on the counter. The whole time. The officer didn't look. He wrote something. Marcus never got to see what, and let him go with a warning that sounded like a promise. That night, his father taped a handwritten note above the kitchen sink. "You are not what they call you. You are what you answer to." Marcus read it every morning until the paper curled. He learned to answer to student council president, to honor roll, to state debate champion. He learned to pick locks of expectation. Not angry, not loud, not a threat. He learned the choreography of safety. Hands visible, eyes down, voice warm, pace measured. At 17 he stayed late after school cleaning up from a fundraiser, and the assistant principal asked if he'd ever considered the military. "You carry yourself like you already belong somewhere that's bigger than you," she said. He went home and looked up recruiting websites, then one tab over, the FBI page with grainy photos of agents in windbreakers. He counted the number of black faces and didn't like the ratio. He applied anyway. Quantico did not care for heat, or for history. It cared for endurance. It cared for the way you kept your chin level when someone barked in your face. It cared for score sheets and tight groupings on paper silhouettes. He met trainees from towns he'd never heard of, men who swallowed vowels like pills, women who lifted twice their body weight and never smiled about it. He made one friend who stuck, Ethan McRae, a second-generation agent with a buzz cut you could set your watch by. Ethan taught Marcus how to tie a Windsor knot in under 10 seconds. Marcus taught Ethan how to read a room without moving a muscle. They took turns being the first through doors in mock raids, and on weekends, drove into town for bad coffee and cheaper advice from retired instructors. His early bureau years were a series of rooms he entered and found colder than expected. He learned how a joke could arrive in a conference room like a stray bullet. "Careful, Wilson's going to accuse us of profiling the donuts," and how laughter camouflaged the sting. He learned to ask the questions that got him labeled sharp rather than angry. He learned that statistics were both shield and sword. The first time he recommended a shift in surveillance priority based on community tip patterns rather than instinct. The section chief pulled him aside. "You want to be right," the man said, "or you want to be like." Marcus chose results, and the arrests that followed were clean, thankless, and exactly the kind the Bureau liked to trumpet without acknowledging who'd led the change. It wasn't only the briefing rooms. In the field he watched as local partners bristled at federal oversight, bristled harder when oversight arrived in black skin. He'd walk up to a perimeter and see the double takes fold across faces like dominoes, hear the soft click of assumption locking into place. He learned to carry his authority like a lantern, bright enough to illuminate what needed to be seen, never so bright it blinded. On a joint operation in his 5th year, he stood shoulder to shoulder with a sergeant who refused to relay his orders. "I don't take commands from someone who wasn't here when we built this," the sergeant said. Marcus kept his voice even. "Then it's a good thing I'm not asking. I'm telling." The bust went off without a hitch, but the after-action report misattributed 3 of his tactical decisions. He saved a copy in a folder he labeled receipts, and worked late. Again. Near the end of his 8th year, a complaint landed on the director's desk alleging that Marcus had intimidated a witness. The witness was a landlord under investigation for defrauding immigrant families. Marcus had asked him to clarify discrepancies about rent rolls and occupancy rates. He had used a quiet voice and the full weight of facts. The complaint stretched a conversation into an accusation. An internal review unfurled like plastic on a carpet. He was told to take administrative leave. He went home and found Danielle on the porch, elbows on her knees, hands clasped so tight her knuckles blushed white. "We'll outlast this," she said. "That's what we do." And they did. 43 days later, the complaint fell apart under the simplest scrutiny. But the stain doesn't always lift where eyes have learned to look. He rose anyway. Not because someone groomed him, but because the numbers made liars out of gatekeepers. Cases closed. Communities safer. Agents transferred in to train under his watch, because his teams came home. He drew maps not just of streets, but of people, who listened, who deflected, who folded under pressure like paper. He made a reputation for walking into a room and finding the person who thought he mattered least, then proving him wrong with questions that rearranged the board. When a pilot program to address bias in emergency response needed a leader, he volunteered. He drafted scenarios in which call takers had to interrogate assumptions. What do you actually see? What did you hear? Is there a weapon, or does the caller feel a certain way? He showed how fear could be a data point, but not a fact. Some departments adopted the training. Others smiled and filed it away. The unexpected twist in his ascent arrived as a commendation he did not want. During a hostage standoff in a rural county, he negotiated the release of a teenager who had called 911 while hiding in a closet. The story went national. Headlines praised calm under pressure and textbook leadership. What most papers missed was the detail that lodged in Marcus's ribs. The first Yeet on scene had detained the teenager's uncle, the one who'd guided the child to safety, because a neighbor described a suspicious black man running. The uncle was a school counselor. He missed the first 20 minutes of the rescue because someone preferred a picture in their head to a person in front of them. Marcus added a line to his training that day. The first emergency is the bias. The second is everything that follows. When the appointment came, youngest black field chief in the state, the ceremony felt small. A handshake, a framed certificate, a departmental email that would be deleted by lunch. He celebrated at home. Instead, Danielle made gumbo, and Ayanna drew a card bordered with little stars. Caleb asked if Chief meant his dad was the boss of all the police. No, Marcus laughed, and trust me, they're grateful for that. Later that night, when the house quieted, he stood at the sink where his mother's old note would have hung if time had a softer grip. He pulled out his phone and typed the words into his notes app. The ritual turned digital. You are not what they call you. You are what you answer to. Still, the job carried its old weather. There were rooms he entered where introductions stalled, until someone else vouched for him. There were panels where his expertise became quaint, when the conversation turned from data to gut feeling. He learned to let the silence after a slight do its own indictment. He learned to save his breath for the fights that moved needle and law. He built alliances across lines that people said couldn't blur. One of those alliances was with a coastal county, whose 911 center had drawn scrutiny for its response to suspicious person calls at resorts. He reviewed their protocols, recommended reforms, pushed for dispatch scripts that turned fear into facts. The county took his report under advisement, thanked him with a plaque, and made 2 changes that looked like more than they were. He didn't know, not then, that one of the dispatchers he briefed would be working a summer shift years later, when a call came in from a woman at Ocean View Resort. He didn't know that the supervisor on duty, the one who decided to upgrade the response to possible armed threat, had once sat across from him in a training about biased 911 language, and asked, "But what if the caller feels unsafe? Isn't that enough?" He had smiled with patient teeth and feeling unsafe is a flag. It is not a weapon. Our job is to know the difference. He didn't know that the sergeant leading the responding units today, Sergeant Paul Ingram, was the same sergeant who had refused to relay his orders on that joint operation years ago, and that Ingram, promoted, remembered the day a black agent told him no, as clearly as Marcus remembered the day he had to say it. His vow was simple and heavy: to make the ground beneath his children steadier than the ground beneath his feet had been. He and Danielle had saved for this vacation longer than they told the kids. They chose Ocean View because the photos looked like peace and because the reviews insisted that everyone feels welcome. He wanted his kids to spend a week collecting seashells, not stairs. He wanted to teach Caleb how to stand on a paddleboard and not think about balancing anything else. He wanted Ayanna to post a photo without calculating which caption made strangers comfortable. He wanted one morning without translation between who they were and what someone decided they meant. The sirens outside the rental tightened their spiral. Danielle shot him a look that asked 3 questions at once. Is this about us? Are we safe? What do we do? He kept his voice even. Stay inside, he said, then softer. We'll handle it. Ayanna's card game still sat mid-play on the table, a small procession of kings and queens, waiting for the next move. Caleb hovered by the blinds, his shoulders squared, jaw clenched like he could muscle the world into fairness if he tried hard enough. Don't, Marcus said gently. Let me look. He moved to the window and lifted the slat just enough to see the road. 3 cruisers had turned in, light bars strobing against palm trunks. A 4th rolled up slow, the unmistakable profile of a supervisor's SUV. He felt the old discipline flood his limbs, not the adrenaline of chase, but the clarity of triage. Identify, assess, de-escalate. He took inventory: plain clothes, no visible weapons in the house, neighbors on balconies already recording, One woman by the concierge desk, holding herself like she'd just finished a hard day's work of being certain. Carol. He replayed the morning like a surveillance tape. Her eyes, her phone, the way she positioned herself to see everything and nothing all at once. Marcus? Danielle said, and he heard the tremor she tried to bury. He turned, stepped close enough that his calm could be borrowed. We didn't do anything wrong, he said. I know, she answered, and it held two meanings. I believe you, and that's not always the point. He thought of his training recommendations sitting in a binder somewhere, under a coffee mug. He thought of the dispatcher's scripts, of phrases that could anchor a response to reality. What do you actually see? And felt a cold suspicion that no one had reached for them this time. He thought of Sergeant Ingram and his particular brand of pride. From outside, a heavy engine, downshifted. Tires crunched over, crushed shells. The first cruiser slid into view through the slat, and behind the wheel, just visible past the flashing wash of red-blue-red, Marcus recognized the set of a jaw he remembered from a different confrontation, a different failure to listen. Ingram, age had added lines, not humility. Marcus's hand went instinctively to his pocket where his credentials rested. 1,000 briefings raced through him at once. Announce calmly, move slowly, demand body cams, stay on, keep hands open, narrate your action. Not because he needed to, he thought with a surge of anger he rarely let surface, but because rituals sometimes keep the worst gods asleep. He took one last look at his family, the life he'd built with relentless intention, despite 1,000 small cuts, and squared himself. I'm stepping onto the porch, he said. Stay where you are. Keep the door open so you can hear me. Danielle nodded, eyes bright. We hear you, she said. Iana reached for her mother's hand. Caleb took a breath so deep it lifted him a half-inch taller. The world seemed to narrow to the line where shadow met sun just outside their door. Then the squad cars screeched to a halt. Tires biting into sand and shell, doors yanked open in a choreography of urgency. Marcus recognized, and feared in equal measure. Lights strobed, radios crackled, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath as boot steps hammered toward the house. Boots pounded the walkway like a countdown. Marcus stepped onto the porch into a wash of pulsing color, the blue and red lights staining the sand, and palms as if the resort itself had been bruised. The air smelled of sea salt and hot engine, and for a breath the world went narrow. Porch rail, stairwell, 4 squad cars fanned at angles, and a 5th vehicle easing to a stop like a judge arriving late. Hands! An officer barked, voice compressed by adrenaline, and a radio mic. Hands where I can see them. Inside, Danielle's hand tightened around Ayana's fingers, then reached back until she found Caleb's forearm. She angled her body between the kids in the doorway without even thinking, a human shield built of instinct and love. Stay behind me, she said, quiet but firm, as if calm could be a force field. Neighbors slid into the scene frame by frame, balcony doors opening, phones rising like a chorus of one-eyed witnesses. A man in swim trunks whispered, "What's happening?" A woman in a sun hat didn't answer. She'd already tapped go loud. Marcus lifted his hands slowly, elbows away from his torso. Palms up. He kept his feet planted on the porch boards, shoulders squared, voice even. My hands are up, he said. I'm unarmed. Step down, another officer shouted, hand tight on his weapon, barrel low but not low enough to relax anyone's heart. Marcus measured the distance. 3 shallow steps, loose sand at the base, crushed shells that would crunch underfoot, slow movements, clear narration, rituals that ought to be redundant but never were. I'm going to step down, he said, as if reminding the world it had consented to reason before. My hands will stay visible. He descended 1 step. The officer to his left, tall, square jaw, gray at the temples, tracked the movement with a rigid precision that told Marcus he'd seen something like this before, and decided to see it again. Sergeant Ingram. Recognition passed through Marcus like a cold sip of water he hadn't wanted. From the doorway, Caleb whispered, Dad, and Danielle's hand found his shoulder, anchoring him to the carpet, to breath, to not rushing the kind of moment that punished rushing. Carol stood near the concierge stand, visor set like a crown, posture composed in that particular way that belonged to people who trusted the world to bend around their comfort. Her phone hovered at her chest, recording. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She watched the scene she had summoned, like a homeowner reviewing a delivery. Get on the ground, the officer on the right repeated. Louder this time, as if volume might turn uncertainty into fact. Marcus took the second step. I want to cooperate, he said, voice steady enough to lay a plank across the panic. My family is inside. I'm the renter of this property. Ground. Now. The command cut again, sharp, rehearsed. No charge stated, no allegation explained. Just the heavy assumption of threat moving faster than words. He reached the last step and stopped. Sand shifted under his bare feet. He kept his hands raised, chin level. He could feel a camera's gaze, several actually, clipping his outline with pixels. He could also feel the invisible camera, the one that lived in other people's heads, focused long before he arrived. Officer, he said, choosing the centermost pair of eyes, what is the reason for this response?
No answer.
Instead, a synchronized tightening hands around grips, breaths held, knees bent, the tense choreography of people trained to take control before they take stock. Inside the rental, Ayana's whisper found the seam in the chaos. Mom, why are they talking to him like? She stopped, as if the rest of the sentence had too many sharp edges to push past her teeth. Danielle squeezed her hand. Look at me, she said. Breathe with me. They synced their ribs and let the air teach their bodies they were still here. The supervisor's SUV door opened with a thunk that sounded like a verdict. A woman in her 30s stepped out, ponytail pinned tight, face drawn between duty and calculation. Lieutenant Sandoval. Her eyes scanned the lines. Officer's porch, man with hands up and snagged for a second on the open door with the family beyond. A flicker of something human warmed her gaze, before training cooled it. Ingram spoke first, like a man who wanted the story on record. In his voice, we received reports of an aggressive, possibly armed male on the property, he announced, loud enough for cameras and echoes. Sir, get on the ground. Marcus kept his tone measured, the way he taught younger agents to do when calm needed to be contagious. I'm unarmed, and I'm not aggressive, he said. I'm asking you to tell me what you think I've done. On your stomach, hands behind your head, another voice insisted, a younger officer to the outer edge, eyes wide behind dark lenses, finger tense along the frame of his sidearm. The name tape read, Ortiz. Her breath came fast. Her jaw worked like she was chewing a thought she couldn't swallow. Her gaze flicked to the door, saw Danielle, saw two teenagers, and then back to the scene as if the sight complicated the script in her head. Phones lifted higher on balconies. The resort manager, a man in a pastel polo, jogged half-heartedly from the lobby and stopped short, caught between guest relations and fear of liability. We should, maybe everyone calm down, he said to no one, which meant to the man with his hands up. Marcus inhaled and let the breath out slow. This wasn't the moment to carry his full story in front of strangers who had already decided which genre he fit. He steadied his stance. I'm going to kneel, he said. My hands will remain visible. He bent down, one knee to sand, the other hovering, as if he could split the difference between compliance and dignity. Cameras leaned forward. Ingram's posture shifted, something like disappointment crossing his features, as if the moment he'd braced for had been denied the spectacle he expected. Face down, he barked again. A seagull shrieked overhead, absurd and timely, and the sound broke something brittle in the crowd's hush. A woman on the second-floor balcony muttered, "This is ridiculous," and a man next to her whispered, "Don't get involved," in the tone of a prayer disguised as advice. Danielle's voice cut softly from the doorway. Careful not to slice the air the wrong way. "Marcus," she said, "we're here." He didn't turn, he couldn't, but he took the sentence like a hand at the small of his back. Lieutenant Sandoval stepped closer, hand lifted a fraction. "Let's slow down," she said to her own team, more than to him. "Sir, do you have any weapons?" "No," he said. "No weapons. Any sharp objects on your person? Anything that could hurt my officers?" The phrasing was textbook and still bruised the ear when held against his bare feet and open hands. "No," he repeated. "Nothing of that sort." "Name?" she asked. Marcus opened his mouth and stopped. He felt the edge of his wallet against his thigh, credentials folded inside like a truth too heavy to toss lightly into a storm. He also felt the outline of the morning. A woman deciding a family he loved was a public problem. A dispatcher converting fear into a hazard code. Old pride wrapped in a sergeant's uniform. He wasn't naive. Names could skyrocket tensions as easily as dissolve them, depending on who wanted what to be true. He chose a smaller truth first. "I'm the registered guest in this rental," he said. "We checked in yesterday afternoon. My family is inside." Sandoval's gaze flicked to Danielle, then back. Anyone else on the property? Just us. He knew the script too. He could have recited it in his sleep. Another officer, a stout man whose cheeks flushed easily under the sun, moved in a step. Lieutenant, with respect, this is non-compliance, he said. We have probable cause based on the call details. What details? The question came from the balcony. Unexpected, clear. A voice that sounded like it paid mortgages and read policy memos for sport. A gray-haired man in a linen shirt leaned on the railing. I watched that woman call for 10 minutes, he said, nodding toward Carol. She never looked scared. She looked entertained. Phones pivoted. Cameras catching his face. Carol's visor tilted in denial. I felt unsafe, she said, finally speaking like the scene owed her a line. He was watching people. Pacing. Marcus didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Sandoval and let the cruelty of the accusation wash around him, instead of through him. He thought, not for the first time, how often felt unsafe, arrived in rooms like a key that opened all the wrong doors. Ortiz swallowed and shifted her weight. She had seen this scenario in training slides, the one where a suspicious person call carried exactly 0 facts. She'd memorized the questions she was supposed to ask herself. What do you actually see? Is there an identifiable crime? Are you projecting fear onto behavior? Now the questions crowded behind her ribs while her sergeant's voice blocked the exit. Ingram's jaw worked. We're not debating a call from a concerned citizen, he snapped, eyes cutting toward the balconies, then back to the man with his hands up. His tone thickened on concerned like it meant more than it said. Sir, last warning, face down. A breeze lifted the edge of the door curtain and pooled cool air around Danielle's ankles, like small mercy. She could hear the math in Marcus's breathing, counting beats, spreading calm as far as it would go. She bent to Ayana's ear. If he goes to the ground, he'll say his name, she whispered, as if speaking the plan out loud could give it bones. Ayana's fingers were clammy and strong. Caleb's chest rose and fell in clumsy sync with his father's, as if breathing could be inherited. Marcus lowered the other knee and let both touch the sand. He eased forward, careful, slow, the way a man eases into cold water he must cross. He set his forearms out and flattened his palms to show they were still empty. Shell grit bit his skin. The porch's shadow receded as the sun leaned over him like a witness. Body cams, he said, voice steady. Are they on? It wasn't defiance. It was a safety check he wanted on the record. Ortiz glanced at her chest unit and tapped it in reflex. The stout officer rolled his eyes and muttered, always with the legalese, not quite under his breath. Sandoval answered, crisp. All cameras are active, she said, and then softer, almost human again. Keep narrating your movements, sir. I hear you. That was when the unexpected twist arrived, sideways and unsummoned. A door opened 3 rentals down, and a woman in a resort staff polo stepped onto her stoop, hair pulled into a tight bun. She lifted a hand, not to wave, but to be sworn. Lieutenant, she called. I'm on the front desk schedule. The caller came to me first, asking how to report people who don't look like they belong. She didn't mention weapons. She asked me whether security could check their paperwork. I told her that wasn't how we do things. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. My name's Kenna. I can give a statement. Cameras shifted again. Sandoval's spine stiffened at the whiff of liability. Ingram's eyes flashed annoyance, then hardened back into mission. Carol's mouth parted, closed, recalibrated. I felt unsafe, she repeated, as if repetition could craft a new truth from the old one. Marcus pressed his cheek briefly to the sand just to keep the ground in the story, then lifted it again enough to speak clearly. My wife is going to step out with my identification, he said, projecting to the lieutenant, not the sergeant. She'll move slowly. He didn't look back. He didn't make anyone choose between his voice and his eyes. Negative, Ingram said too fast. No one else exits until he's secured. Sandoval cut in, voice firm. We can accept ID at the threshold. She said, Ma'am, if you can hear me, place it on the ground outside the door and step back. Danielle's throat bobbed. Copy, she said, because sometimes borrowing the language of the people in your yard felt like the only way to be heard. She eased the door wider and slid the wallet onto the top step, then retreated, palms visible, heart thudding where hands couldn't show. Ortiz's gaze tracked the wallet with visible relief, as if paperwork could unspool panic. She took a step and Ingram's arm flared, a silent command that held her back. "I've got it," he said. But he didn't move to pick it up. He moved toward Marcus instead, boots grinding shell, posture tilted forward in that way that turns proximity into pressure. "Don't reach for me," Marcus said, calm flattening the tremor beneath. "I will not resist."
"Not up to you," Ingram replied, and for a fraction of a second, his hand drifted toward the center of his chest, hovering near the body cam as if habit had taught it another pattern before training. Reclaimed it, his fingers curled back into a fist.
Balconies went quiet, all that soft commentary swallowed by the centripetal pull of one choice about to be made. Ortiz's lips parted. "Sarge," she started, but the word died under his shadow. Marcus lifted his hands higher, slow, deliberate, as if he could hold up the sky itself. "I'm cooperating," he said. "I'm staying still." Ingram closed the last 3 feet in 2 strides. Authority coiled tight in his shoulders, reaching out not for the wallet on the step, but for the man in the sand. One hand cutting for Marcus's wrist, the other angling toward his shoulder as if to pin gravity to a story it didn't belong to. Marcus's palms hovered open in the flashing light, his name unsaid on his tongue, as Sergeant Ingram lunged in to seize his arm, just as a sharp electronic chirp from one of the body cams sounded, and every lens swiveled, unsure whether it had captured the truth or had arrived one heartbeat too late. The electronic chirp splintered the moment, just as Ingram's hand cut from Marcus's wrist. It wasn't loud, but it was precise, the tiny confirmation tone that body cams made when a clip locked and uploaded, a sound Marcus knew better than most. He froze his breath and let stillness be his shield. Instinct wanted to surge up, flash the badge, snap his name like a flare, seize control of a scene that was sliding, but another instinct, older and harder, held him in place. Sudden moves get rewritten as threats. Titles get twisted into challenges. He clenched restraint like a rope, and did not pull. He lifted his chin an inch, enough to see shoes, holsters, posture, and read the room the way he'd taught junior agents to read danger. Ortiz on the left, nervous energy but eyes alive, camera angled true. Cave Farley, stout, jaw tight, ego ahead of facts. Ingra, he didn't need the nameplate. He knew that jawline and the old grievance baked into it. Lieutenant Sandoval, front center, mind running diagnostics faster than her team's adrenaline would allow. Above them, balconies stacked with small rectangles, a stadium of lenses. The porch behind him breathed his family's fear and quiet, syncopated pulls. "Sir, keep your hands where they are," Sandoval said, moments before Ingram could clamp down. Her voice was a metronome, steady, purposeful. "We're going to resolve this." Marcus kept his palms open to the sky. "Then tell me what I'm being accused of," he said, each word trimmed of heat. "What's the charge?" He didn't raise the question to win an argument. He set it down in the sand to mark where reason should stand. From near the concierge stand, a delicate clink ceramic against saucer, Carol visor immaculate, lifted a paper cup to her lips, and sipped like the moment belonged to her calendar. She tilted her phone to keep Marcus centered in frame, a small smile playing at the edges, as if vindication tasted sweet, and came hot. Caller reported aggressive behavior and possible weapons. Farley recited, eyes sliding over Marcus's bare forearms. The beach shorts, the open hands that refused to fit the script. "We're responding accordingly. Possible is not actual," Marcus said. "Aggressive is not observable behavior." He softened the syllables, almost like he was coaching, not correcting. "I need to understand whether this is an investigatory stop, or a custodial arrest." Ingram bristled at the vocabulary, bent closer, the salt-bright air catching in the creases around his eyes. "This is us keeping people safe," he snapped, and the phrase people landed with a weight, not evenly distributed. A gull swept low, as if drawn by siren light. From a balcony, a man's voice carried, oddly formal. "Officer, the resort employee just said the caller asked to check their paperwork. That isn't a crime." The witness linen shirt, cool hair was still there. His sentence shaped like a deposition question. Phones pivoted his way, and then back to the sand where the story kept happening. Behind Marcus, Danielle steadied her hands against the doorframe. "Iana, breathe with me," she whispered, and their inhale-exhale braided together until the trembling had somewhere to go. Caleb hovered in the hinge of the doorway, like a door within a door, wanting to anchor something he couldn't touch. Sandoval's gaze flicked once to the wallet on the step, and back to her team. "Officer Ortiz, retrieve the ID," she said. No sudden movements. It was both instruction and apology, a reminder that something simple could still be made dangerous by the way it looked. Ortiz stepped forward in a narrow arc, keeping her weapon holstered, palms open like she was approaching a skittish animal. She didn't want to spook. "I'm picking up the wallet," she narrated, eyes on Marcus's, then dipped as if curtsying to the moment. She lifted the leather, flipped it once, and froze at the glint gold crest. Blue Field, the letters that rearranged rooms. She didn't say it out loud. She only swallowed, blinked, and looked to her lieutenant with a question that already knew its answer. "Run it," Sandoval said, the words tight at the corners. She didn't reach for the badge, didn't let rank leap the queue. She stayed in procedure even as she could feel the floor shifting beneath it. Ortiz stepped out of the immediate heat and keyed her radio, voice dropping into clipped syllables designed for clarity. The dispatch reply came back layered. A main channel confirmation, and beneath it a supervisor tone that sharpened the air. The unexpected twist arrived through the static. "Be advised," the dispatcher said. "Caller has 2 prior documented complaints for bias-based reports at this location. Proceed with caution regarding caller credibility." The note hit like a small stone tossed into a pond. No splash, all ripples. Heads tilted fractionally. Farley's jaw flexed. Ingram's nostrils flared to disguise the flinch. Carol's cup paused halfway to her lips. "That's irrelevant," she said loudly enough to try to feed the narrative. "I felt unsafe." The sentence tried to sound like evidence, and missed. Marcus kept his cheek just above the sand. A compromise with dignity. "Lieutenant," he said, "is there an articulable reason to continue with a drawn weapons posture?" It wasn't legalese to show off. It was a bridge. Give someone a vocabulary for de-escalation, and sometimes they'll cross. Sandoval inhaled. "Holster," she said, not loudly, but with spine. She swept her palm down, a physical cue. Ortiz complied immediately, relief visible in the set of her shoulders. Farley hesitated, looked to Ingram, then clicked his holster shut like he was conceding a bet, not lowering a risk. Ingram kept his weapon low, indecisive, then finally eased it home with a huff through his nose. "Thank you," Marcus said, "and let gratitude be more than strategy." He felt Danielle's breath unhook a notch behind him, heard the small sound a teenager makes when a terror recedes from impossible to merely awful. Ortiz handed the open wallet to Sandoval. Now that barrels had disappeared, the lieutenant read the identification like a person reads a weather alert that arrives mid-picnic. The name did not acquaint itself gently. Marcus J. Wilson. The seal, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The title, Special Agent in Charge. Field Office. She did not let her eyes widen, but the tiny beat between inhale and exhale gave her away. She lifted her chin toward Ingram, meaning to signal slow, adjust, rethink, but he cut across the queue like a man late to a point he'd been determined to make. "Credentials don't change probable cause," he said. Words tossed at the sand, not at the lieutenant. He stepped back into Marcus's orbit and let the shadow of his frame overlap the open hands on the ground. "Sergeant," Sandoval said lightly, warning folded in, "we're evaluating." "We can evaluate after he's secured," he replied, and the word secured came out like it owned the vowels. On the balconies, you could feel the audience choose sides with their silence. The resort manager in his pastel polo took a timid step closer, then stopped again, wringing his hands as if liability could be massaged into reason. Kenna, the front desk staffer who had spoken up, stood rooted at her stoop, eyes fixed on the lieutenant like hope had chosen a uniform. Marcus tilted his head enough to see the lieutenant's shoes. He knew this crossroads. He'd diagrammed it in classrooms with fluorescent lights and bad coffee. There's the path where ego drives, and policy rides shotgun. And there's the path where the badge is ballast, not battering ram. He held the silence open long enough for someone else to hear themselves think.
"Sir," Sandoval said, choosing the second path in a voice that decided more than it asked.
"I'm going to ask you to continue to comply. We are going to pat you down for safety and verify your status with dispatch. Then we will resolve." She pivoted her body half a degree, interposing rank between Ingram and the man on the ground without calling it a shield. Marcus nodded once. "I'm not resisting," he said, narrating my movements. He turned his right hand slightly, showing his empty palm, then set it back carefully. "For the record, my wife and children are witnessing. Body cams are recording." A tiny ping sounded again. The auto-upload heartbeat. Somewhere in a server farm no tourist could imagine. The scene was etching itself into permanence. On one balcony, the linen-shirt witness said softly, "Good," like a benediction. Farley approached from the side, hands open. "I'll do the pat," he told the lieutenant, voice trying for neutral and landing close enough. He crouched, carefully, and ran the back of his hand along the outer seams of shorts, ankles, calves, brief, clinical, nothing to turn human into object, if done gently. "No weapons," he reported, surprise tucked awkwardly into professionalism. Ortiz exhaled as if that single sentence had been a weight she'd been carrying across a tightrope. She keyed her radio. "Dispatcher, confirm ID status on subject," she said. "Static then. Confirmed. Federal credentials valid and current. Stand by for supervisory liaison." Another voice layered beneath, a calm supervisor. Clipped and calm. "Units maintain professionalism. This scene is being monitored." Monitored. The syllables rearranged posture. Not the cameras. Those were a given. This was the sense that their own house was watching. The kind of oversight that made even stubborn men weigh their next muscle twitch. Ingram's jaw ticked, the muscle like a second hand keeping bad time. He bent anyway. Choice narrowing to the single track he knew best. "Roll your wrists together," he ordered, reaching down not for the ID now in his lieutenant's hand, but for Marcus's arm. Choosing cuffs over conversation like a man choosing familiar music over new instructions. "Sergeant," Sandoval warned. Sharper. "I'm not letting him up until what?" The question came from Kenna again, the staffer, voice steadier now that the word monitored had landed. "Until he's humiliated enough for the caller to feel right." It wasn't official language, and maybe that's why it pierced. Carol's laugh was small and brittle. "You people are making this about race," she said, a sentence so practiced it came out smooth. I felt unsafe. Marcus didn't turn to her. He let the sentence pass as if it had missed its stop. He kept his eyes on the lieutenant, and set his tone to hold. "Lieutenant, I'm prepared to stand and present myself for a conversation," he said. "I will not do anything sudden, but I will not be face down while my family watches. When you have verified who I am and that I'm unarmed." The line trembled between duty and dignity. Sandoval looked down at him and saw, if only for a heartbeat, not a suspect, but a father choosing each breath like it cost him something. She opened her mouth. Ingram moved faster. Half a step, an arm extending, fingers reaching for the hinge of Marcus's elbow, the first touch in a chain that would decide the story's next shape. Marcus lifted his head, found the line where voice becomes shield, and finally reached for the thing he'd kept holstered the longest. He let the words come out measured, not flung. "Sergeant," he said, "do not place your hands on me without cause. I am Special Agent in Charge Marcus Wilson." Ingram's fingers paused an inch from Marcus's skin, the title detonating between them, without sound. Sandoval's eyes flashed to the badge. Ortiz's radio crackled a fresh instruction, and every camera tightened its frame, as the question hung, would the rank that could end this also blow it wide open? "I'm Chief Marcus Wilson, FBI," he said, voice low but cutting through the humid air, like a bell in a silent church. "And you've just made the biggest mistake of your careers." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. But the weight behind each syllable landed like a gavel. The words did what the last 10 minutes hadn't. They broke the posture of certainty. Ortiz's eyes widened. Her hand instinctively moved an inch from her holster. Lieutenant Sandoval blinked once, then twice, as if replaying the name against the memory of her law enforcement directories. Farley shifted his weight like the sand had just gone soft beneath him. But not everyone retreated. Sergeant Ingram froze for only a fraction before masking it with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Name and badge don't erase probable cause," he muttered, though the confidence in his tone had thinned. He stepped back half an inch, not far enough to concede ground, but enough to acknowledge the hit. Above them, the audience on the balconies murmured, phones now aimed with surgical focus. They'd felt the turn in the scene, the crack in the official script, and down by the concierge stand, Carol's smirk finally flickered. She hadn't expected this. Her coffee cup lowered, her grip tightening just enough to whiten her knuckles. But she didn't leave. She stayed rooted, as if leaving now would admit she'd been wrong. "Lieutenant," Marcus said, still on his knees but no longer prone in the posture they'd demanded. "I am ordering, not requesting, that you secure and preserve all body cam footage from the moment your units arrived. That's a direct instruction from a federal agency head." There it was. The formal shift in the air, the weight of a jurisdictional collision. The local cops now stood in the awkward middle ground between procedure and politics, between what they'd been called here to do and the reality they'd just stepped into. Sandoval cleared her throat. Understood, she said carefully, because she knew body cam preservation was standard. But being ordered to do it by a federal chief meant the chain of custody just got a lot more complicated. We'll maintain all recordings per policy. But Marcus's gaze didn't leave her face. He'd been in this position before, seen promises dissolve in the hours after a confrontation, watched evidence conveniently corrupted or lost before an internal review. He wanted their compliance on record, here and now, in front of every lens pointed at this scene. Officer Ortiz, he said, shifting his eyes just enough to make it personal. Is your camera on? Yes, sir, Ortiz replied without hesitation. It's been recording since I arrived.
And yours?
Marcus's voice landed next on Farley. Farley nodded once, curtly. On since dispatch. Then, almost imperceptibly, a movement. The third officer on the outer edge, badge name Parker, let his left hand drift downward toward the center of his vest. It was a familiar motion to Marcus, not reaching for a weapon, but for the body cam side button. A 3-second hold there would kill the recording. He'd seen that sleight of hand before, the silent little trick meant to erase inconvenient truth. The crowd didn't notice. Most were still fixated on the standoff between Marcus and Ingram, but Marcus caught it instantly. Officer Parker, Marcus said sharply, his tone slicing across the sand. The man's hand froze mid-reach. Yes, sir. Parker's voice was suddenly thinner, his posture less certain. Step away from your vest, Marcus said, his words carrying the crisp authority of someone who didn't bluff. Now, and keep both hands visible. Sandoval's head snapped toward Parker. Is there a reason you were reaching for your device? Parker's answer stumbled. I was adjusting. Don't finish that sentence, Marcus cut in. Sharper now. Your hand was on the power toggle. This is not the day you want to explain why your footage is missing. From the balconies, a ripple of quiet spread, the kind that meant witnesses were filing this moment away for later retelling. Carol's lips pressed into a thin line, coffee forgotten at her side. Ingram folded his arms. You're making a lot of accusations, Chief, he said, leaning on the title as if mocking its weight. We're just trying to handle a report. No, Marcus said, turning to him fully now. You're trying to handle me, and you're learning in real time that the rules work both ways. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This one was charged, anticipatory. Sandoval exhaled, and to her credit, didn't try to smooth it over. She addressed Parker directly. Hands away from the vest, she ordered. Do not touch your camera until this scene is cleared. That's not a suggestion. Yes, ma'am, Parker replied, voice tight. Marcus took the opening to rise slowly to his feet, his knees sending little puffs of sand into the air. He moved deliberately, like every muscle had signed a contract with caution. I'm standing, he said, narrating for the benefit of both cameras and conscience. My movements remain non-threatening. From the doorway, Danielle's hand rose instinctively toward him, but she stopped short of stepping outside. Her eyes held a mix of relief and dread. Relief that he was vertical, dread for whatever came next. Iana and Caleb peered around her, their faces taut with the kind of tension they'd never forget. I will be making a formal record of every badge number present, Marcus continued, scanning the line. And I will be requesting the caller's statement, as well as the 911 transcript, be forwarded to federal oversight. Ingram chuckled once, short and humorless. You think you can waltz in here and… I didn't waltz in, Marcus interrupted. I was here with my family. Until one of your residents decided a black man at a vacation rental was worth a tactical response. The bluntness of it landed differently. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Ortiz looked down at her boots. Farley glanced toward the water. Ingram's smirk wavered. Carol finally spoke again, voice thinner than before. You're twisting things. I never said… You implied, Marcus said without looking at her, and the implications were enough to put guns in my face in front of my children. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a decision. The air seemed heavier now, the flashing lights painting everyone in shades of emergency that no one could quite step out of. Sandoval cleared her throat again, choosing her words carefully. Chief Wilson, I'm going to request we move this conversation off the sand and into a more controlled environment. We can document everything without… No, Marcus said, and it was quiet, not confrontational. Just final. We'll finish right here, where my family can see that this ends with me standing. For a moment, no one moved. The standoff wasn't about compliance anymore. It was about narrative, about who would decide how this day was written. Then, almost too quietly to register, Parker's hand began drifting toward his vest again. This time, it was angled like he was going for the mute button, not the power toggle, but the one that cut audio while keeping video. Marcus caught it, his voice like glass cracking. "Lieutenant, your officer is attempting to disable his microphone." Sandoval's head whipped around. "Parker," she barked, the words snapping in the air. "Hands off. Step back." "Yes, ma'am," Parker stammered, both palms rising now like a man caught in his own trap. The crowd on the balconies murmured again. The scene was no longer just about a wrong call. It was about what the response was trying to hide. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This footage doesn't belong to you," he said to the entire line. "It belongs to the truth, and I will have it." As Sandoval moved to address the breach, a sharp chime came from Ortiz's radio. "Dispatch. Urgent." The voice on the other end was tight. "Be advised, caller is now claiming she overheard the suspect making threats against resort guests. Units, confirm safety status immediately." Every head turned toward Carol, and for the first time, she looked nervous. A dispatch claim about overheard threats hadn't finished bouncing off the stucco walls when a bystander's video left the resort entirely. It leapt from a shaky phone to a timeline, from a timeline to a feed, and from that feed into 1,000 pockets that buzzed in unison. Before a supervisor could draft the first line of a statement, the internet had already chosen a headline. The uploader wasn't who anyone would have guessed. It wasn't the linen shirt witness, or even Kenna from the front desk. It was a vacationer named Trevor Hale, mid-40s, golfer's tan, family beach photos stacked on his profile, who had hit go live from his balcony and narrated the scene in a voice that began certain and ended conflicted. "So, cops just swarmed a rental below us," he said, lens wobbling over red-blue strobes. "They're on this black dad like he's a war criminal, but the guy's just kneeling, hands up, kids inside crying." His wife's voice drifted in. "Trevor, don't say anything stupid." He hesitated, then aimed the camera so the microphone caught Marcus's calm narration and Officer Parker's quick reach toward his vest. Within minutes, a clipped version hit Twitter with a caption that stuck. "They came for him because he's black. They stayed because he's powerful." The first replies were the usual noise: sarcasm, doubt, the reflexive "what did he do though?" But the audio undercut skepticism. You could hear Marcus ask for charges. You could hear Sandoval say holster. You could hear the chirp of body cams like small hearts learning to beat in time. Hashtags broomed sand into a shape. Vacation while black. Chief Wilson. Body cams on. A teacher in Atlanta quote tweeted, "I teach teenagers how to narrate their movements during traffic stops. Imagine needing it on vacation." A prosecutor in Seattle replied, "Probable cause requires facts. Feeling unsafe is not a fact." A thread from a black dad in Ohio climbed past 10,000 likes. "On our last beach trip, my son asked if we look legal enough to check in. Sit with that." Down on the sand, none of that had reached the air. Sandoval was still wrestling, an invisible steering wheel, trying to turn her team off the road that pride loved. Carol's face had lost its easy angles. She watched the officers recalibrate under a sun that revealed everything. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup until the lid dented. She pulled out her phone and opened her neighborhood group chat. The last message there read, "You did the right thing. Keep filming." The internet had decided otherwise. A civil rights reporter named Melina Quarles quote tweeted the clip with a short thread. "Multiple units, guns drawn, no clear crime articulated. Note the officer reaching toward his vest twice. That's the audio toggle. Public record should not require heroics." Underneath, a former 911 dispatcher added, "Listen for it, no facts from caller, just I feel unsafe." This is exactly why revised intake scripts matter. Someone else found a conference clip from 3 years prior. Grainy ballroom, weak microphone of Marcus himself presenting on bias in emergency calls. "Fear is a data point. It is not a weapon. Our job is to know the difference." The juxtaposition hit like a drum. At the police department 2 miles inland, a public information officer named Dana scrolled the thread and felt the old burn of being late to a narrative. Her desktop flashed with message requests. Local anchors, national producers, a podcast that feasted on chaos. She typed, "We are aware of a video circulating. Gathering facts. Ask the public for patience." She backspaced patience. The chief wanted a line about community safety. She wanted a line about how it felt to watch a man kneel on sand because someone else's feelings carried more weight than his reality. Back at the resort, Trevor's livestream picked up 1,000. then 5,000 viewers. His wife's hand entered frame to steady the phone, as Sandoval ordered Parker away from his vest. The chat filled with hearts and furious face emojis. With record everything, and do not go ins. Trevor read a comment out loud. He's FBI, and then swallowed uncertain. He panned too far and caught Carol's visor in the corner of the screen. The chat fixated instantly. Is that the caller? She's sipping coffee? This is modern-day Minutemen nonsense. An unexpected twist arrived on that same balcony. Trevor's teenage daughter, Paige, who had spent the week ignoring her parents and soaking in sunlight like it was currency, took her father's phone, opened TikTok, and clipped the 20 seconds that mattered. The reach toward the body cam, the chirp, Marcus's line about evidence belonging to the truth. She overlaid text. Why is the camera always the first thing to go? Her edit stitched into a sound that had already trended. Ambient sirens, gulls, a soft click, and by the time Sandoval told Farley to stand down, Paige's video had cleared 1 million views. Other angles bloomed. Kana, hands still shaking, typed her account into a notes app and screenshotted it. As front desk staff, I was asked to call security to check their paperwork. Caller did not mention weapons to me. We do not call police to check people's paperwork. She added no hashtags, just her name and shift time. Her coworkers begged her to take it down. She left it up. When a local station DM'd her, she didn't answer. She called her mother and cried quietly into the crook of her elbow. Inside the Wilson rental, the phones on the coffee table lit up like small storms. Danielle's sister texted from Chicago. Are you safe? You're on my feed. A colleague of Marcus's sent only a period, and then, I'm watching. We're here. The Bureau's regional communications liaison called twice and left voicemails that began with congratulations for how controlled he sounded and ended with requests to not antagonize local partners. Marcus didn't listen to either message. He kept his eyes on Sandoval and the line of badges that had started to look human again. Iana opened her Instagram and found her friends sharing the clip. The captions were soft knives. This is what I meant when I said I don't feel safe at the beach. She wanted to throw her phone into the ocean, wanted to hurl the entire world where salt water could strip it smooth. Caleb hovered over a group chat where his basketball teammates were arguing with a kid from their school, who had typed maybe he did something, and then gone quiet when the audio made the maybe out of place. Local news grabbed the footage within 20 minutes. An anchor's voice overlaid drone shots of the coastline, developing now at Ocean View Resort. Chirons learned Marcus's title and rushed it onto screens. FBI field chief detained during family vacation. Another station softened the verb to stopped. The difference wasn't semantic to the people on the sand. It was a line between humiliation and procedure. A national morning show producer DM'd Sandoval's personal account with a, "We'd love to have you walk us through best practices," and she stared at the message until the letters blurred, then put her phone face down on the hood of her SUV. The department's statement finally went live, and immediately rang hollow against the video people had already seen. Our response prioritized safety. We appreciate the public's understanding as we gather all facts. Replies stacked like bricks. Which facts? Whose safety? Why were guns needed for a board game? Someone pasted a screenshot of the department's body cam policy with a red circle around deactivation. Another posted a link to a city ordinance about false emergency reporting. The ordinance didn't say race or bias, but the comments did. Trevor's feed caught a new angle. The linen shirt witness peering down. His voice was calm and surgical. I'd like to say for the record that I watched the caller. She did not appear afraid. She appeared certain. Those are not the same. The chat went wild. Give this man a mic. She appeared certain is the line. A poet retweeted and wrote, certainty is a weapon. Fear is its holster. It got 20,000 retweets in an hour because sometimes the internet values poetry more than policy. The resort manager shuffled in and out of frame, talking to someone on a phone he held too close to his ear. He announced nothing, fixed nothing, hovered near liability like it was a piece of furniture he could push behind a plant. Guests began drifting down to watch in person, drawn by the sound of crisis, the way people used to be drawn by church bells. A little boy tugged his mother's sleeve and asked why the man was on the ground. She said, "He's not anymore," and exhaled like she'd been underwater. Unexpected twist number 2 came from the county 911 center. A clerk 22, Ernest, who had 3 months earlier sat in a training led by a guest lecturer on biased calls, posted a message in a private forum. We need to change the script. Fear is not a crime. I'm saying this as the person who routes your calls. It wasn't public. It made its way there anyway. When a local reporter emailed the county for comment on training adequacy, the director called a meeting on a Saturday, sent a memo with the subject line reputational risk, and wished he could unhear the name Chief Wilson, echoing down a hallway that had never expected him to arrive by way of a beach. The vacation while black hashtag became a gallery of pain. Families asked to prove rentals, honeymooners followed by security in their own hotel corridors. A grandmother's story about being told she looked lost in a lobby she'd paid for with 30 years of saved tips. Thread by thread, Marcus's morning became a tapestry the city could not fold small. Down on the sand, Sandoval's posture shifted from defensive to procedural. "We're going to take statements," she said, voice carrying. "We will also take the callers." She glanced at Carol and then at the balconies like she could feel the collective intake of breath. Ingram looked ready to argue, and then thought better of it under a sky that had started to watch him. Marcus nodded once, the move small but final. He didn't soften his gaze, didn't perform relief for anyone. He catalogued badge numbers, the way he catalogued rooms, methodically, without revenge. "And the footage stays preserved," he said. "It does," Sandoval answered. She put the sentence into the open air where it could grow teeth. The department's PAO drafted a second statement, in a panic. "We learn and improve." The chief insisted on adding, "We stand with all communities." The internet translated it into, "We saw the video too." Carol checked her phone again, and saw her name trending in a smaller circle that felt like a noose. Friends texted, "What's going on? Turn off your location." One message came from a number she'd saved as Bunko Night. "You okay? People are being dramatic." Another came from her supervisor at the arts board. "Let's touch base Monday." She typed and deleted 3 drafts of a post. "I was only trying to help. I didn't mean for I felt unsafe." She hovered over share and couldn't press it. The algorithm that had always liked her pictures of lemon tarts and hydrangeas did not like this version of her. Trevor ended his live with a visible shiver. "We're putting the phone down," he said, the camera catching his daughter's face pale, determined before the screen blacked. But the video no longer needed him. It had found 1,000 mirrors. Inside the Wilson rental, the board game lay splayed across the coffee table. Kings and queens, waiting for a world that still believed in fair play. Danielle brushed a line of sand from the edge of the couch and felt something harden and something else soften in the same breath. She texted her sister, "We're okay right now." Then she added, "He's still outside." The second sentence tasted like a prayer and a protest. Marcus didn't check his phone. He took one step back toward the porch, not far enough to retreat, just enough to signal that this scene belonged to him again, in the small way a person can reclaim a square of ground. He felt the eyes on him, officers, neighbors, a nation skimming on screens, and ignored all of them, except the 2 pairs in the doorway. "I'm right here," he said, and the words were for his children alone. Sandoval gestured to Ortiz. "We'll need the caller's formal statement," she said, and the emphasis on formal sounded like a promise. Ortiz nodded and turned toward the row of rentals, toward the one with the white wicker chairs and the spotless welcome mat that had watched all morning without learning anything. Carol flinched at the movement, then gathered herself. She set her coffee down and smoothed her visor. Her jaw settled into a shape it used for HOA meetings and stern emails. She told herself she had done nothing wrong but was prepared to look wrong for a while, until people calmed down. She stood and walked back to her unit, the door swallowing her like a mouth. The internet kept spinning. News segments queued up, podcasts scheduled, dueling op-eds writing themselves in drafts no one would admit existed yesterday. A law professor posted the city statute for false reports again, and added a line, "If officers are the sword, video is the shield." Today, the shield moved first. The post accrued comments at a rate that could make a person dizzy. Somewhere in there, an old clip of Marcus speaking at a community center resurfaced. Shirt sleeves rolled, voice measured, "Power is how you stand when no one wants you standing." It slid into the trend like a key finding its lock. The afternoon light turned the ocean into a sheet of hammered silver. The crowd thinned into clusters, the way people leave a movie theater still talking about the scene they can't shake. Sandoval radioed in a supervisor consult, and kept her eyes on Parker's hands as if attention itself could prevent sin. Ingram stared at nothing in particular, and tried to remember where his version of control had gone. Then the sound returned to real wood and metal, and breath. Somewhere above, a door clicked shut. Somewhere below, a palm frond sighed. And down the row, at a rental with white wicker chairs, and the spotless mat. A firm knock landed on Carol Whitmore's door. The knock was not hurried, but it carried a weight that traveled through the frame and into Carol's chest. 3 measured taps. She froze mid-sip, coffee lukewarm now, and glanced at the clock on the wall. Too soon for housekeeping, too early for her friend from the tennis courts. She smoothed the visor she hadn't removed since morning, as if a crisp brim could shield her from whatever waited. She opened the door halfway and stopped. Marcus Wilson stood there, still in plain vacation clothes, sand-dusted shorts, a navy t-shirt that clung slightly at the shoulders. He looked nothing like the man who had just commanded a line of armed officers to keep their cameras on. Yet his presence filled the doorway in a way that made the hall feel narrower. His stance was relaxed but rooted, the kind of stillness that had gravity. For a moment, neither spoke. The light from the corridor pooled across the threshold, catching in the faint salt streaks on Marcus's forearms. Then he asked, simply, why? No title, no accusation, just the question, stripped bare. Carol's fingers tightened around the door edge. She felt the urge to retreat behind it, but something in his gaze, steady, unblinking, held her there. I wasn't sure about you, she began, her voice wobbling in places she didn't expect. I saw you with your family, and you kept looking around. It felt off. Looking around, Marcus repeated, not as a question but as if trying on the words for size. At a beach resort. Her eyes darted past him toward the walkway, scanning for anyone listening. I didn't know if you belonged here. The phrasing hung between them, raw and naked, in its choice. Marcus tilted his head slightly, the gesture more patient than indulgent. You mean, you didn't know if I belonged where? In a rental I paid for. On the sand, within sight of you? Carol's mouth opened, then closed. She shifted her weight, trying to find a version of the story that would sound better out loud. It's not like that, she insisted. I felt unsafe. At the word, something flickered in Marcus's eyes, too quick to be anger, too grounded to be surprise. It was recognition. Unsafe from what? He asked quietly. She glanced away, toward the unit next door, where a sliding glass door had been left open to the breeze. You were pacing, watching people. Watching my kids, Marcus corrected, still calm, counting the paddle boards to make sure we had enough life jackets. Speaking to my wife about whether we should eat at the cafe or the pier. Carol's jaw tightened, as if holding back the urge to say, it's not personal, but the air between them made it impossible to pretend it wasn't. From the open door next to hers, a voice cut in. Oh, come on, Carol. Both turned. Standing barefoot on her patio, coffee mug in hand, was Ellen Matthews, a neighbor in the same row of rentals. White hair cropped short, skin freckled from years of sun. She leaned against the railing like she'd been waiting for this moment. I've been here all week, Ellen said, her voice loud enough to carry down the hall. I saw them check in. I saw you staring, and I heard you ask the desk if they could check their paperwork. Carol flushed, her eyes darting between Marcus and Ellen. You were just doing what you always do. Ellen cut in. You decide someone doesn't fit, and you make it their problem. Only this time, you picked the wrong person. The hall seemed to contract. Carol's breath hitched, but she didn't respond. Marcus didn't smile at the support. He didn't need it. His voice stayed level. Do you know what happens when someone calls 911 and says, I feel unsafe without facts? People with guns come. They come fast and they come ready. My children were 10 feet away when you made that decision for them. Carol's hand flexed on the doorframe. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But you meant for it to go somewhere, Marcus said. You meant for it to turn into a question mark over my head big enough for the police to answer. She looked down at the floor, her throat working, as if she could swallow the moment. I thought I was helping. Helping who? Ellen asked, from the side, voice sharp as a gull's cry. Carol's eyes shot to her neighbor, but the question didn't need repeating. Marcus let the silence stretch. The hallway smelled faintly of sunscreen and sea air, but underneath it was the metallic tang of something that didn't belong, tension thick enough to taste. Finally, Marcus stepped back half a pace, as if giving her room to speak. She didn't. You don't have to admit it to me, he said. You will have to admit it somewhere. Because this isn't over. Carol's eyes lifted sharply. Is that a threat? No, Marcus said, his tone unwavering. It's a fact. And facts, unlike feelings, don't vanish when you stop looking at them. From behind him, footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. Ortiz approaching with a clipboard. Sandoval not far behind. The sound seemed to pull Carol's shoulders up toward her ears. I hope, Marcus added, his voice soft now, but no less firm, that one day you understand the difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. And I hope you understand it before someone else pays for it. For a heartbeat they stood there, her in the shadow of her doorway, him in the full light of the corridor, Ellen watching like a witness on the record. Then Marcus turned, not in anger but in conclusion. He walked past Ortiz without breaking stride, the faint scrape of his sandals against the tile the only sound, until the corner swallowed him. Carol stayed at the door, pulse loud in her ears. She felt the weight of Ellen's gaze, and didn't meet it. She shut the door slowly, but before the latch caught, a voice from the hallway, low unfamiliar, said her name. She opened it again to see a man in plain clothes holding an ID wallet. Carol Whitmore. He asked, I'm here to take your statement. Under oath. Carol closed the door softly, as if sound itself could be a confession. The latch clicked, and the quiet broke open. Inside the air felt stale, coffee gone cold on the counter, the hum of the mini-split too loud for a room this small. She set the visor down with ceremony, and realized the brim was bent from the way her fingers had clutched it all morning. Her phone vibrated once, then again, then in a steady tremor that moved across the countertop like a trapped insect. She turned on the television, needing a voice that wasn't her own. The resort's local news channel had pivoted to a graphic that slashed red across a live shot of the beach. Developing FBI field chief detained during vacation incident. They played the bystander video, the angle from the balcony, the one she hadn't noticed at all when she felt so sure of herself. The sound filled the rental, and with it came Marcus's voice, even and disciplined. What's the charge? Then the lieutenant's holster. Then the small treacherous chirp of body cams committing everyone to memory. The lower third changed to a new line. Caller questioned. About motive. The camera cut to the concierge stand, where Kenna had given a halting, careful on-record sentence. Carol watched her own morning get fed back to her, stripped of the little lies that made it easier to swallow. Each second built a case against her she hadn't prepared to defend. Her certainty, not her fear, her curiosity masquerading as protection. Her request, check their paperwork that sent everything rolling downhill. Her phone jittered again. She finally picked it up. A text from Bunko Knight. 7. You okay? We saw. People are going nuts. Another from Caitlin Tennis. You had to do it. You know how the world is. Then the turn. Angela PTA. I can't support what you did. I'm sorry. I have to say that out loud. A number she didn't recognize. Racist witch. Another. Turn off your location. Her sister. Call me. Seriously. Her supervisor at the arts board. Carol. We need to discuss your public visibility. Call before She didn't call anyone. She opened a browser and typed his name like a person typing a spell. Marcus Wilson FBI. The results rushed the screen as if they had been waiting just out of sight. There were articles from national papers, commendations, policy forums, a graduation speech at Quantico where he spoke about patience as a form of strength. There was a clip of a congressional hearing where he explained how biased 911 calls escalate into harm. He spoke plainly, with that same measured cadence she had heard on the sand. In another video, he stood in a community center gym and answered tough questions without deflecting. He looked like a man people believed in on purpose. She clicked and clicked. An op-ed he authored, Fear as Evidence. Why Feelings Can't Be Facts in Emergency Response. A slideshow from a training titled, De-escalation Starts at the Call. In a photo, this one felt like a punch of him pinning a badge on a new recruit, smiling with a kind of pride she couldn't find a synonym for. The caption, Special Agent in Charge Marcus J. Wilson congratulates the newest class on their oath. There were comments beneath it, agents past and present, community organizers. A woman who wrote, he talked to my son after his friend was profiled. He didn't just talk, he showed up. Carol closed the tab, the room pressing in. In the television frame, a legal analyst said the phrase false reporting with painful precision. The word bias sat next to it like a shadow that matched its shape exactly. Her phone buzzed again. Board call 2:30 p.m. It came through the calendar app, as if it were just another agenda item. Dog-eared novels for the summer reading series, a mural unveiling she'd promised to MC, a grant pitch to a foundation named after a philanthropist who loved the word access. She felt herself moving toward the couch, sinking down as if the cushion could absorb responsibility. A new text from Evan. Board chair. HR advises a leave of absence pending review. Let's keep this quiet. We'll support you privately. Post nothing publicly. She stared at the words until they looked like someone else's bad news. Leave of absence. Quiet. Support privately. She recognized the pattern. She had written emails just like it back when controlling optics felt like solving problems. She typed a reply and deleted it. Typed another and deleted that. She finally sent, understood. Then, unwilling to leave it clean. I thought I was protecting our community. His answer came fast, which meant he had it ready. We all care about safety. We also care about perception. For now, step back. She read perception 3 times, as if the word might break apart and show the truth inside it. A FaceTime request flickered. It was her sister, Maya, whose patience had curdled years ago into a bluntness that saved time. Carol let it ring out. The second request came with a text. If you don't pick up, I'm posting.
Posting what?
Carol muttered. But she knew. Maya had introduced her once. At a block party. To the family that lived 3 doors down. A black father. A woman with laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. 2 kids who drew chalk suns on the sidewalk. Carol remembered writing an email 2 summers later. About strange cars parking after dark. She'd meant drug dealers. She had meant people who looked unfamiliar. She hadn't meant the father's brother visiting from out of town. She had not meant to make a police cruiser come to a street that had never once needed one. She answered. Maya appeared, backlit by kitchen light, jaw tight. Do not say you felt unsafe, she said, skipping greeting. Don't say it to me. Don't say it to anyone.
I didn't.
You did. And you will again. Unless you say something else first. What is that? I was wrong. Full stop. Carol swallowed. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Maya's voice softened not with pity, but with a fatigue that had been earned. You want to keep your job? You want people to forgive you? Start with the one sentence that isn't a performance. Carol opened her mouth and found no sentence waiting. I can't talk right now, she said, and hung up. The silence after felt louder than the phone ever had. She scrolled through messages. The tennis group chat had split cleanly. Cheerleaders in one lane, and warning flares in the other. Remember the break-ins last fall? One friend wrote. Carol stared at the screen until a memory snapped into place. The break-ins had been a teenage boy cutting across yards after missing his curfew. She had called the non-emergency line anyway, because the shape in the dark fit a fear she carried like a flashlight. She turned down the TV but not off. The scrolling headline at the bottom now read, Police, body cam footage will be preserved. The anchor's voice shifted to a new segment about how social media had changed the calculus. They played a clip of a communications professor saying, narrative can outrun fact. In this case, the video is the fact. Carol blinked at the phrasing. She had always believed that whoever spoke first defined the story. Today the story spoke itself. There was a knock at the door again, soft, professional. She flinched and peered through the peephole. Not Marcus. Not the lieutenant. A young woman in a blazer stood there with a bland smile and a portfolio tucked under her arm. Carol cracked the door.
Miss Whitmore?
I'm Allison Reed, the woman said, slipping a card onto the console table the way doctors slip needles into sleeves. Media relations. A friend of a friend mentioned you might need guidance. We specialize in high-velocity moments. I don't need a fixer, Carol said, but the sentence held no conviction. Allison lifted her hands. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to triage. Step 1. No more posts. Step 2. A controlled apology crafted with care. Step 3. Some visible act of reflection. Training, donations, listening tour. Listening tour, Carol echoed, like a person trying a borrowed coat. We can do it ugly, or we can do it carefully, Allison said. Ugly means you dig in and hope your people are loud enough to drown out the rest. Carefully means you try to set one thing right, that you knocked crooked. Carol stared at her, then at the muted TV where Marcus's face paused mid-answer, looked like a man refusing to be edited. He's respected, she said, not sure who she was confessing to. Very, Allison said. Which makes it worse. Carol surprised herself. Worse for whom? For you, Allison said, and didn't bother to soften it. But also, depending on what you do next, maybe better for others. Carol closed the door gently on the media consultant and her portfolio. She turned the TV sound back up, needing the human voice again. A national anchor had picked up the story now. The set colder, the language smoothed. They ran the clip of Marcus at the community center. The line about power and standing, when no one wants you standing. The chyron beneath it, OP-ed, when fear calls. A new email pinged. Subject employment status. She opened it. The message was 2 paragraphs of legal cushion. Pending review administrative leave. With pay this does not constitute a determination. The words pressed on her chest because they weren't punishment. They were suspension, which felt like falling without hitting anything. Her hands moved on their own, reopening the browser as if it could rescue her. She searched Marcus Wilson family and found nothing that felt like gossip. Only a photo of him at a school library opening. His hand on a ribbon, a boy at his side holding scissors too big for his small hand. She looked too long, then shut the laptop as if it had caught her staring. The room had a view of the water. She hadn't noticed the way the light made a path across it until now. She drew the curtain and let the line of silver fold into fabric. Her phone buzzed again, but this time the message crawled through in a way that felt different. Like it had crossed wires it wasn't supposed to. We know where you are. She tapped the sender unknown. No profile photo. Area code she didn't recognize. A second message came before she could react. Tell your Fed hero to pack up. Last warning. She stepped back as if the words had physical dimensions. For a beat, she imagined screaming. Calling the front desk. Finding the lieutenant. Another thought arrived. Strange and clear. The threat wasn't for her. The threat was about him. Carol stood very still. She read the messages again, counting the spaces between the words, as if white space could tell her how serious men were when they chose sentences like weapons. She debated forwarding them to someone, and then put the phone down, hands shaking with something that tasted like shame, and something that tasted like fear, finally rooted in a host that deserved it. Outside, the breeze shifted. A lone gull made a line toward the pier. She could hear laughter from a few doors down, vacationers who had not lost their afternoon to the news. The ocean kept doing what it had always done, pretending that drama, no matter how loud, was just weather. Across the property, in a beach rental where the blinds were half closed against the glare, Marcus held the phone with a grip he used when his hands needed to learn a room before his voice did. The text had arrived to a number he kept for emergencies and quiet weekends. Leave before we make you. No sender, no preamble. Danielle saw his jaw set and touched his wrist. One finger, then a palm. What is it? He showed her without speaking. Her eyes scanned, then came back to his. Is this real? It's specific, he said. That's real enough. Iana's and Caleb's voices carried in from the kitchen, normal for the first time since morning, arguing lightly about juice, a sliver of afternoon peeking through. Marcus lowered his voice to the place where decisions live. We secure the perimeter, he said. We don't give fear more rooms than it already took. The board game still lay open on the table, the queen slightly askew like she was considering a new line of attack. Marcus set the phone beside the deck of cards, and for the first time all day, let the anger lift to the surface long enough for it to catch light. He wasn't going to leave, not like this. Not because a stranger, anonymous and bold, believed the hum of a threat could move a man who had spent years learning the difference between noise and danger. He looked at the door, then at the window where a sliver of ocean shivered. Somewhere down the row, Carol stared at her own door and counted breaths. A soft scrape sounded at the Wilsons' threshold. Paper against wood. Danielle opened the door half an inch, and a folded note slid inside on a small tide of sand, its single line inked in block letters. Tomorrow night. Pier. Come alone. The note lay between the door and the welcome mat, like it had crawled there on its own. A single fold, block letters pressed into cheap stationery. Go home before we make you. The sand that had come in with it traced a pale crescent on the tile, a tide line for a threat that didn't need sound to be loud. Marcus stood over it for a long moment, eyes tracking the grain of the paper, the pressure of the handwriting. He'd been trained to read pen strokes like maps. How much force where the pressure lightened, whether it was written fast or rehearsed. This was deliberate. Someone wanted the words to have weight. Someone had taken time. Danielle came up behind him. Who? She asked, though her voice made it clear she already knew the answer was someone who thinks they can scare us. He didn't pick it up. Could be one of 100, he said, and that's before the story went national. Then it's a coward, she replied. Marcus crouched, using a tissue to lift the note by the edge, like it might carry more than just ink. He set it on the counter. away from the kid's sightline. Ayana was on the couch with her headphones in, but her eyes kept darting toward the adults, like she could hear the silence even through music. Caleb lingered in the kitchen doorway, pretending to refill his glass but taking in every detail. "We can leave," Marcus said finally, the words feeling strange in his mouth. He wasn't a man who offered retreat easily. "Pack up, drive inland, finish the week somewhere else." Danielle's gaze fixed on him. "And give them what they want." "It's about safety," he said, choosing each word with care. "This isn't a classroom lecture anymore. It's direct." Her answer came quiet, but it hit like a gavel. "Safety is why you took this job. It's why you tell other people to stand their ground against things like this. If we leave now, what do you think Ayana and Caleb will remember? That their dad knew how to run." The words weren't cruel, but they were sharp enough to slice through the hesitation in him. He'd been in standoffs where a wrong move could write the rest of your life in seconds. He knew this was different. The threat here was shadow, not muzzle flash. But shadow could still swallow you if you let it. A knock interrupted the tension. Not police this time. Resort management. A man in a pale polo and khakis, name tag reading Trevor, guest services manager. His smile was the kind that tried to stretch over discomfort and didn't make it all the way. "Chief Wilson," Trevor began, already glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one in the walkway was within earshot. "I wanted to extend an option. Given what happened today, and the attention, I thought maybe you'd prefer some privacy." Marcus stayed still. "Privacy or removal?" Trevor hesitated. "We can process a full refund for the rest of your stay. You could relocate to another property we manage. Inland, quieter, less disruptive." Danielle's jaw tensed. Disruptive for who? The manager's hands came up halfway, palms out. "Look, this isn't about sides. We just want everyone comfortable." Marcus stepped forward. "Comfort isn't the point," he said, voice level but carrying enough edge to cut through the manager's rehearsed tone. "We booked here, we stay here. Unless you're telling me the resort can't keep us safe on your property?" Trevor's eyes flickered. "We take guest safety seriously." "Good," Marcus said. "Then we'll see you at breakfast." The manager nodded once, lips pressed tight, and left without further argument. The click of the latch was louder than it should have been. For the rest of the afternoon, the Wilsons tried to reclaim some semblance of vacation. They walked the beach, staying in public view, not because Marcus feared being unseen, but because visibility was its own kind of shield. They ordered lunch from the Pier Cafe. They bought Caleb a shirt with a cartoon pelican, but even with the sun leaning warm against their backs, the note stayed in Marcus's pocket, its creases like a pulse. Back in the rental, as dusk bled into the horizon, Danielle lit the small balcony lantern. Marcus sat at the table, laptop open, writing an internal report to the bureau. Not dramatic, not emotional, just the facts. Time of threat, manner of delivery, context. His thumb kept brushing the phone, as if expecting another anonymous text to arrive. By nightfall, the resort had settled into the sounds of evening. Distant laughter from the pool, the low hum of televisions behind closed curtains, the steady wash of tide on sand. The kids were inside, debating dessert. Danielle was stacking plates by the sink. Marcus stepped onto the balcony, needing the air to feel bigger than the room. That's when he smelled it. A faint acrid edge in the breeze. Plastic, maybe, or something scorched. He stepped to the railing, scanning the walkway below. Nothing at first. Then he saw the shadow low, moving along the siding near their door. A flicker of reflection from glass shards catching porch light. He moved quickly to the entryway. Danielle saw his face change, and was beside him before he spoke. He opened the door to find it. Spray paint, thick and fresh, scrawled across the white slats of the siding. "Go home" in the same jagged block letters as the note. Under it, their welcome mat had been slashed down the middle, fibers curling outward like a wound. A trash bag, half burned, lay smoldering near the railing, smoke curling lazily into the night air. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb and Ayana crowded behind, the word hanging in the air in both paint and meaning. Marcus stepped forward, scanning the walkway. No movement now, just the echo of what had happened minutes before. He crouched to put out the last ember with the edge of his sandal, then straightened slowly. "This is an escalation," he said, voice low. "Whoever's doing this thinks they're invisible. They're wrong." Danielle turned to usher the kids back inside. "No one sleeps near the front windows tonight," she said firmly. Marcus pulled out his phone, took photos, Angles wide, then close, then detail shots of the handwriting. The paint dripped in certain strokes, telling him the can had been shaken, but not fully primed, impulsive, but not sloppy. Someone wanted it legible from 20 feet away. Neighbors began to peek out. Ellen from next door. Trevor the manager again. A few tourists whose curiosity beat their sense of privacy. Phones came out. Whispers started. "You want me to call the local PD?" Trevor asked from the walkway, his voice low. Marcus didn't look at him. "They're already here. They just don't know it yet." "What does that mean?" "It means this was done by someone who's been watching us all day," Marcus said, "and they knew exactly when to move." Trevor swallowed. "I'll have maintenance clean this first thing in the morning." Marcus turned then, his gaze steady. "No. Leave it tonight. Let people see it. Let them know what's happening here in the open." Danielle's eyes met his from the doorway. The kid's already behind her, out of view. She didn't have to ask if he was sure. She knew. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt again, almost enough to wash out the chemical tang of paint. Almost. Marcus stood there another moment, scanning the walkway, before stepping back inside and locking the door. Hours later, long after the resort had gone quiet, a soft metallic rattle came from the balcony, like a coin flicked against the railing. Marcus moved to the window in time to see a silhouette vanish into the shadows, leaving behind a single spray-painted message on the glass in dripping red. Tomorrow. By morning, the red spray paint on the balcony glass had dried into a threat that caught sunlight like a wound. The word tomorrow stared into the living room, daring them to blink first. Marcus did. He brewed coffee, ran another scan of the perimeter with a calm that had edges, and answered 3 calls he had declined the night before. The 4th was from a national morning show. Live segment, 2 cameras, 10 minutes. Danielle watched him listen, nod, listen again. When he hung up, he found her eyes and didn't make her ask. "They want me on at 8, he said. "No studio. Remote from here." She exhaled slowly, matching his breath the way they had done 1,000 times, in parking lots, and after community meetings that went sideways. "Then we'll make this place look like a home, not a war zone," she said, already straightening cushions, already angling the chair toward the window where the ocean insisted on being beautiful. Caleb peered at the spray-painted word through narrowed shades. "They did that while we were sleeping," he said. The sentence wasn't a question. It was a small inventory of betrayal. Ayana leaned against the counter. "If you go on TV, will they stop?" Her voice didn't beg. It measured risk like math. "They might try harder," Marcus said, "which is why we don't let them write the story." The network's crew arrived quiet, soft shoes on tile, eyes careful. A producer introduced herself with a voice that was gentle but efficient. "We're here to amplify, not intrude." They set up a single camera in the corner, a light that washed the room without bleaching it, a microphone clipped at Marcus's collar like a benign insect. The producer asked if the vandalism should be visible. Marcus nodded. "It should be real," he said. As 8 o'clock crept forward, the resort seemed to hold its breath. Ellen from next door sent a plate of still warm muffins, and a note say what needs saying. The concierge called to offer extra security by the walkway. The manager texted a reminder about the refund they weren't taking. Sandoval checked in by phone. "We'll have a unit within 2 minutes if you call. I'll be monitoring dispatch." It was the first time her voice felt like partnership rather than posture. The anchor's voice fed through the earpiece, bright with urgency. Joining us now is Special Agent in Charge Marcus Wilson, who was confronted by police during a family vacation after a 911 call questioned his belonging. "Chief Wilson, thank you for being here." He looked into the lens and saw nothing but his own reflection, faint and steady. "Thank you for having me. Let's start with last night," the anchor said. "Your rental was vandalized with the words 'Go home' and 'tomorrow.' Did you consider leaving?" "I considered my children," Marcus said, "and what they would remember if we packed up and let fear give us our itinerary. We are still here. We will still be here tomorrow." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The camera did that part for him. Leaned in, found the paint on the glass, lingered on the cut mat by the door. "What happened on that sand yesterday," he continued, "was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a call where feelings were reported as facts. A response calibrated to a stereotype rather than observable behavior. And when cameras arrived, some officers reached for the single device that protects the truth. That's not a bad look. That's a systemic problem." The anchor gave him room. You're not just talking about civilians who make biased calls, she said carefully. You're including law enforcement. I am, he said. I work with officers every day who want to get this right, who do get it right. But bias doesn't live in one uniform. It's ambient. It floats until someone breathes it in and mistakes it for instinct. On screen, they split the frame to include Kenna's note from the day before. The anchor read part of it aloud. We do not call police to check people's paperwork. Marcus nodded, as if to the words themselves.
What do you say?
The anchor asked. To viewers who might see this and think, well, if the police were called, they had to respond as if it were real. I say responding doesn't mean escalating, Marcus answered. The script can start with questions. What do you see? What did you hear? Is there a weapon? I feel unsafe is a data point. It is not a weapon. We train that. We ignore it at a cost. The feed cut briefly to a montage the producers had pulled overnight. Black families asked to re-scan keycards in hallways. Men questioned on pool decks. A grandmother telling a camera, voice quaking about being asked if she was visiting her own children. In the corner of the screen, hashtags rolled like tide. Vacation while black. Chief Wilson. Body cams on. A historian in a small box below them called it a postcard from the real America, and the phrase stuck like salt. When they returned to Marcus, his face was a study in controlled energy. America keeps announcing that it has arrived at post-racial like that's a destination. With a street address, he said. He lifted a hand, palm open, not to lecture but to hold the air steady. There's no finish line. There are choices. Yesterday, choices were made. Today we get to make different ones. The questions turn to policy. Do you support laws penalizing biased 911 calls? The anchor asked. I do, he said. Not because punishment cures bias, but because it creates cost where harm was previously free, and because it forces departments to change intake scripts, to train dispatchers to ask for facts, not feelings. Unexpected twist arrived in his ear, mid-sentence. The producer off-screen murmured, "We have breaking." The county's 911 center just announced an immediate protocol revision. The anchor touched her earpiece. Chief Wilson, we're getting word that the county where this resort is located has just issued new guidance, effective today, requiring dispatchers to document concrete observations from callers and to classify feeling unsafe as a secondary note, not a primary hazard. They also say they will release a redacted transcript of the call. Marcus blinked once. A small sigh left him. A sound not of satisfaction but of gravity. Good, he said simply. It's late, but it's good. The anchor nodded. We have another update, she said. A spokesperson for the police department says they followed procedure. The union has issued a statement defending the officers. Of course they did, Danielle murmured off camera, just loud enough for him to hear. But the anchor continued. They also confirmed that all body cam footage has been preserved and will be reviewed by an outside agency. She paused. There's one more development we want your reaction to. We've learned the resort initially offered you a refund to relocate. Do you think businesses have an obligation to do more than remove the target of harassment? They do, he said. No hesitation. If your first instinct is to move the person harmed instead of confronting the harm, you're not managing risk, you're expanding it. While the interview streamed, the world outside their walls moved as if the segment had sent electricity into the pavement. A civil rights group tweeted out a press conference time. The local NAACP called for a community forum at the pier that evening. A hospitality workers union posted solidarity. We see black families treated like trespassers, and black staff treated like furniture. Enough. People began to gather at the end of the boardwalk with handmade signs that caught the ocean light. We belong here, ask for facts, not fear. This beach is ours too. Calls poured in. A pastor offered his church as a safe place if needed. A black-owned cafe down the road sent over a cooler of sweet tea and wrote "On the House" on the lid in marker. The interview wound toward its end. Chief Wilson, the anchor said, there was a word spray painted on your balcony. Tomorrow, do you feel safe here tonight? I feel responsible, he said. For my family. For the truth. For the people who don't have cameras when this happens to them. He let a beat sit. We're not going anywhere. As soon as the mic unclipped, and the producer thanked him, the room returned to its ordinary size. Danielle stepped into him, forehead to his chest for one long heartbeat. You did what you always do, she said. You told the truth like it had a spine. Outside, the pier had become a slow river of people. Some came to gawk. Most came because someone else texted. We should be there. A local news van edged into the resort parking lot. Kenna passed by on her lunch break, and seeing Danielle at the door, lifted 2 fingers in a quiet salute. Ellen joined the small crowd near the railing, a sign tucked under her arm, the slogan hand-lettered with a simple anger: "Fear isn't probable cause."
The police department called a press conference for noon. The chief, flanked by a wall of flags, said the phrases that weave a net around accountability. "We value all residents. We will review. We stand with our officers." A reporter asked, "Why were guns drawn?" Another asked, "At what point is a caller's credibility assessed?" The chief said, "We can't speak to the specifics." The union president followed with a statement about trial by social media, and a question from the back cut through. "Then why did an officer reach for his body cam twice?" No one answered. The cameras caught the non-answer like it was a quote.
At the same time, a different microphone amplified different stories 2 blocks away. Local black residents lined up to speak beneath a canvas tent. Someone dug out of a garage. A middle-aged man in a work shirt said, "2 summers ago, security followed us from the lobby to the elevator to the door of our room." A young woman still in her lifeguard uniform said, "I work here. Last month a guest told me I blended into the towels when I stood too close to his cabana." A grandmother, her voice soft but unwavering. "We used to drive out here on Sundays. My grandson asked if we could come back after they stopped making faces at him. He's 7. He shouldn't have to be brave yet." Marcus listened from the edge, hands in his pockets, making himself small so other voices could fill the space. He answered questions from a second-tier journalist with the same care he had given the broadcast anchor. When a teenage boy edged close, phone in hand, and asked, "How do you know when to speak up?" Marcus said, "When your silence would make someone else smaller." The resort manager came again in the afternoon, 2 security guards hovering behind him like commas. "We're installing additional cameras along this row of rentals," he said, trying for helpful and landing on harried. "We've also hired 2 off-duty officers for the night." Danielle's eyebrow lifted a millimeter. Marcus answered first. "Make sure their cameras stay on," he said. "Of course," the manager said, and you could hear the word optics rattling around behind his teeth. Unexpected twist came in the form of a new clip made, afternoon, a snippet of the 911 call transcript released under pressure. It hit the internet like a weather change. The caller's voice, identified only as female, said, "They don't look like guests." The dispatcher asked, "What do you see that makes you think they are a threat?" The caller replied after a beat too long, "They're watching people." There were no weapons mentioned, not once. Someone paired that audio with the balcony video of the body cam reach. The result was a Rorschach test you could fail. The story was no longer local. It jumped state lines, then time zones. An evening news promo showed Marcus's calm face beside the words, "What does belonging look like?" A columnist wrote, "This is not about a beach, it's about ownership of space, of narrative, of who gets to feel like the default in Nivek." The line ricocheted through feeds and into living rooms, where people wanted to believe something else about their country, and had to watch this first. By early evening, the pier's railings were ribboned with paper signs, the kind that crumple when the air cools, which it did, mercifully. Danielle squeezed Marcus's hand. As the sun tilted, "They showed up," she said. "She didn't add for us. She meant for themselves." He nodded, scanning the faces, filing away details, the way his mind always did. Joy sat next to anger. Resolve settled over fear like a blanket that let breath still move. They were walking back toward the rental, tired, a little feral with adrenaline, when Sandoval's SUV rolled up. She stepped out without the hard frame of the morning. "There's something you should know," she said, "and I'd rather you hear it from me than from a stranger." "What's that?" Marcus asked. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the way information had traveled all day, bent in half, carried by breath. "A lawyer contacted the department a few minutes ago," she said. "Says she represents the caller." Sandoval's eyes held steady. "She wants a meeting. Tonight." The resort's conference room smelled faintly of salt and carpet cleaner, a strange mix of the ocean just outside, and the attempts to keep it from coming in. The blinds were half closed, letting in slivers of orange sunset that made everything feel sharper, as if the light itself was listening. Marcus sat at the end of a long mahogany table, posture calm but unreadable, his fingers resting lightly on a folder he hadn't yet opened. Danielle was beside him, her eyes fixed on the door, as if she could will the person behind it to arrive honest. Sandoval leaned against the far wall, her uniform crisp, her expression harder to read than Marcus's. A camera crew, 2 local reporters and 1 national freelance stringer, waited along the edges, their tripods already angled toward the chairs. The door opened. Carol stepped in first, her lawyer just half a step behind. She looked smaller than she had on the beach, her white blouse immaculate but clinging at the shoulders, betraying sweat she probably thought no one could see. The lawyer, dark suit, expensive watch, moved like someone who knew how to measure every step for effect. Carol's eyes flicked toward the cameras, then away. "I didn't agree to this being filmed," she murmured to her lawyer. "You agreed to the meeting," he replied softly but firmly. "The media's presence was part of the terms they set. Remember?" Marcus didn't rise. "You asked for this meeting," he said evenly. "Let's hear the offer." The lawyer cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to issue a public apology on record, in writing and on camera, in exchange for you agreeing not to pursue any formal complaints or legal action. The apology would acknowledge that her call was misguided, and that the information she gave to 911 was inaccurate." Danielle's laugh was short, without humor. "That's not an apology. That's a press release with perfume sprayed on it." Carol's chin lifted a fraction. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice straining for sincerity. "But the death threats, the online harassment, I didn't deserve that." "No one deserves threats," Marcus said, his tone still level. "But this isn't about what you've endured since. It's about what you started." Her lawyer shifted in his chair. "She's willing to accept responsibility in a way that's public and clear. That's a fair resolution." Marcus studied her for a long beat. "If this were about accountability, you wouldn't be here bargaining for your reputation. You'd be here asking how to make it right for the people you harmed, not just my family." Carol's face flushed. "I'm here, aren't I? I didn't have to come." Danielle leaned forward, her voice low but precise. "You came because your name is trending under racist 911 caller, and your employer put you on leave. You came because this is damage control, not remorse." Carol's hands tightened around the strap of her purse. "So what do you want?" she asked, her tone slipping toward impatience. Marcus didn't blink. "You want me to agree not to file charges? Then here's my condition. You participate in a public anti-racism initiative. Not once. Not a photo op. I want you in the workshops, listening to people you've never had to hear before. I want you speaking to other residents in this county about what it means when you weaponize fear. And I want it documented on the record, with no edits." Carol's lawyer shifted again. "That's unusual. We could issue a donation instead." "No," Marcus interrupted. "Money doesn't unteach what you've learned. It doesn't unteach what other people here still believe." Carol's eyes hardened. "You want to humiliate me?" Marcus shook his head once. "No. I want you to stand in a room where you're not the authority, where you can't control the narrative. That's not humiliation. That's change." She laughed, short and brittle. "You think I'm going to stand up in front of a room full of people who already hate me and let them throw stones?" Danielle's voice cut in, steady and cold. "They don't need to throw stones. They just need you to hear them." Carol turned to her lawyer. "We're not agreeing to that." The lawyer leaned in, whispering something Marcus couldn't hear but could guess. Carol's lips pressed together. She stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping against the carpet. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I came here to make peace, and you're trying to turn it into a circus." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Peace without accountability is just silence. And silence is where this all started." Carol's jaw worked, a muscle twitching along her cheek. She slung her purse over her shoulder. "We're done here." The lawyer rose as well, smoothing his tie. "We'll consider other options," he said. His voice clipped. Marcus didn't move. "One more thing," he said as they reached the door. "When you walk out, remember, this isn't a closed room. It never was." Carol frowned. "What does that mean?" Danielle's eyes flicked toward the far corner of the room, where the red recording light on one of the cameras blinked steadily. Carol froze for half a second. Just enough for the realization to settle, before she yanked the door open and stepped into the hallway. The camera crews pivoted instinctively, catching her exit from multiple angles. Her lawyer tried to shield her with his shoulder, but the space was too narrow, the lenses too quick. Outside, the low rumble of reporters' voices swelled into sharper questions. "Ms. Whitmore, do you admit your 911 call was racially motivated? Will you take part in the anti-racism program? Do you regret not agreeing to Chief Wilson's terms?" Carol kept walking, her steps clipped and quick. but her face was turned just enough for the camera to catch the flush spreading across her neck. Inside the conference room, Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. Danielle reached for his hand. "You knew she wouldn't take it." "I knew," he said. "But now the whole country knows what she turned down." Sandoval pushed off the wall. "And the cameras got it. That matters." Marcus finally opened the folder in front of him. Inside was the original note that had been slid under their door. He looked at it for a beat, then closed the folder again. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Out in the hallway as Carol made for the exit, a phone was thrust into her hand by someone she didn't recognize. The screen was lit with a live feed, her own face, storming out of the meeting, already clipped and shared thousands of times, the caption reading, "Apology rejected." She walked. In the corner of the video, another figure could be seen for just a second, a man in a dark cap watching her leave with an expression she couldn't quite place. By the time Carol reached the parking lot, with her lawyer in tow, the hallway clip was already looping across feeds, with a caption sharp enough to slice reputations. "Apology rejected." She walked. The video did what videos do. It flattened the room into size. Comment sections filled like tide pools, some calling for arrest and jail time, others chanting the softer refrain of "she made a mistake." A podcaster with 1 million subscribers called it cancel culture with better lighting. A community organizer replied, "Accountability isn't cancellation, it's the bill arriving after a long meal." Panels assembled as if conjured. Square boxes of faces debated on split screens, while a banner scrolled beneath, "False reporting or honest fear." In one box, a former prosecutor argued that intent mattered. In another, a sociologist insisted impact did. A talk radio host read the transcript snippet, where the caller had said they don't look like guests, and asked his listeners to underline which word felt like a dog whistle. Marcus's calm made its own kind of weather. Clips of him saying fear is a data point. It is not a weapon, were stitched into explainer threads and sewn to the top of timelines, like patches. Teachers started a chain, posting this for my students who learned the narrate your movements talk before they learned to drive. A pastor wrote, "Blessed are the patient, not because they endure injustice, but because they make space for justice to arrive." Even so, praise came with a twin, a strand of critique that refused to let gentleness be the only answer. Activists posted, "If all we get is a meeting and a new script, we've taught them how to be careful, not how to be better." Another thread pushed harder. "No more workshops without consequences. Fine her, charge her, change the law." The word law found traction. State-by-state roundups surfaced. Where false emergency reporting was a misdemeanor, where it could become a felony, where bias motivation existed only as a paragraph in a committee draft that had never reached a vote. Law students posted color-coded maps. Public defenders warned about unintended nets that catch the wrong fish. A mother from 2 counties over wrote, "When my neighbor called 911 on my son for selling candy, the officer gave him a lecture about permits. Maybe if she had faced a charge, she'd have thought twice." Another parent added, "If we only punish callers, departments keep their policies untouched. We need both." The resort tried to step out of the crosshairs with a statement that sounded like it had been polished until nothing sharp remained. It landed with a thud. Guests replied with their own footage. A guard trailing a black couple down a corridor last summer. A front desk clerk asking for ID again, and then again while a white family breezed by with pool towels and a wave. A former employee posted anonymously about quiet directives to double-check certain guests. The story stopped being about one woman and became a mural of many hands. Danielle watched the discourse evolve and devolve from the couch, legs folded under her, a legal pad balanced on her knee. She wrote things down, names, facts, phrases that felt like they would matter later, because writing kept panic from turning into smoke. Every so often she glanced at the sliding door, where tomorrow still bruised the glass in dry red. The resort offered to scrub it. Marcus told them to wait until after sunset. "Truth should be seen while there's light," he'd said. Marcus kept his phone face down. The bureau had already called, 2 separate numbers with the same script about support and partnership and caution. He offered no grand quotes to the relentless text inquiries from shows looking to book him for the other side. He saved his energy for the people who had shown up without microphones. The hotel staffer who had slipped them extra keycards with a look that meant "if they lock you out," and the elderly man in linen who had knocked on their door to say simply, "I'm sorry for my silence. I won't be silent again." In the afternoon heat, a small march formed without anyone assigning it a name. Parents pushed strollers. Teenagers carried poster board with letters that slanted as they walked. Belonging isn't a pass. Ask me what I saw, not what I feel. A brass trio from a high school band played something that wasn't quite a hymn and wasn't quite a protest song. It moved anyway. Inside group chats, the debate found its most feral form. Someone from Carol's bunco circle posted a template apology for her to use. Another friend edited out the word race entirely. I'm sorry for any distress caused. Carol stared at the drafts and tried to find herself in them. She kept finding only choreography. Her sister texted her again. If you say feel unsafe, I will reply underneath you with the truth. Carol typed I was wrong into a notes app and stared at it until the letters blurred. A city council member floated a proposal. Fines for callers whose reports relied on identity rather than behavior, coupled with mandatory training. Commenters cheered. Commenters warned. A civil liberties group offered a thread. We support penalties for demonstrably biased false reports. We also caution against building tools that will be used against the same communities already over-policed. The thread didn't trend, but it sat like ballast. Back at the resort, Sandoval walked the perimeter with a clipboard, speaking into a radio like a person who had decided to invest in consequences. She paused at the Wilsons' door, took in the paint, the slashed mat, the char from the burned bag. Maintenance comes at 9, she said. We'll have officers posted at both ends of this row. They know their cameras stay on. Good, Marcus said, because that word, he glanced at the glass, isn't a promise. It's a dare. He didn't say the rest. That he was tired down to the bone marrow. That he wanted to fold himself into the quiet and pretend the ocean was just water again. He didn't say that the note in his folder, the first threat, had been joined by 3 more messages overnight, each vaguer than the last, and therefore more dangerous, like fog that can hide anything. As twilight put color back into the sky, a live stream notification popped for a community forum, hosted by the NAACP, at the pier. Marcus went without fanfare, and stood in the outer ring, letting other people's stories be the current. A hotel housekeeper in a floral blouse spoke into the mic, voice soft, truths hard. Sometimes I'm invisible to guests. Sometimes I'm a suspect. I am never just a person doing my job. A restaurant owner shared how diners looked past his black hostess to ask a white busser for the real manager. Not everyone praised Marcus there. A young organizer took the mic and pressed in with grace sharpened by grief. Sir, she said, not unkind, we respect your composure, but when we meet felt unsafe with patience. Sometimes we train the next caller to speak softer, not better. We need something with teeth, murmurs agreed. Marcus nodded, absorbing the critique without putting up a shield. Teeth and training, he said, not one or the other. News producers clipped his line and ran with it. Panels sprouted new chyrons. Teeth and training. A columnist framed it as a test of the post-racial idea. Could a country that congratulated itself for progress admit that progress needed enforcement? While the forum wound down, a notification appeared on a local station's feed. Exclusive interview. Retired police chief breaks silence. The thumbnail was a man in his late 60s on a front porch. Uniform long gone, the authority still hanging around his shoulders like an old coat. Viewers clicked out of habit, and then stayed out of surprise. He cleared his throat once and stared off camera, as if searching his own past for the right box to open. My name is Howard Ellison, he began, voice graveled by time. I served as police chief of this county for 12 years. I trained a lot of the men and women you see on that sand. He paused, long enough for the sentence to find listeners who didn't think they were listening. And I was wrong. Not about everything, he added, a wry line to keep honesty from buckling, but about something big enough to make all the little things worse. The anchor, off-screen, gave him space. Ellison continued. We told dispatchers to take callers at their word, because we thought it was safer to overreact than underreact. We told officers that better safe than sorry meant arriving hot. We called it prudence. It was bias with a badge, he inhaled. I signed off on those scripts. I let a culture of deference to a certain kind of caller dictate how we moved. In living rooms, people went very still. On the pier, phones lifted high to the evening air. In the Wilson rental, Danielle put her hand on Marcus's forearm and felt the muscle beneath it go quiet. Ellison wasn't finished. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I need to say one more thing before I lose my nerve. His eyes softened in a way that made him look both older and lighter. I recognize a pattern in this case. I've seen reports come across my desk from the same neighborhoods, sometimes the same names. I didn't see it then, or maybe I didn't want to." He swallowed. "I trained Sergeant Ingram, and I was the one who told him years ago that it's better to apologize later than hesitate now." Somewhere off camera, a bird called the sound pierced the quiet like a pin. Ellison let it pass. "If you're asking what accountability looks like for someone like me," he said, "it looks like saying this out loud. And it looks like telling you that there's more. There are past calls documented that line up with what you saw yesterday. I can point you where to look." He lifted his eyes to meet the lens. "Chief Wilson," he said, speaking as if across a table, not through a screen. "You don't know me, but I owe you, and your family, more than a statement. I'm ready to talk on the record." The feed cut to the anchor, startled into sincerity. "We've just learned," she said, pressing a hand to her earpiece, "that retired Chief Ellison has requested a meeting with Chief Wilson tonight. He says he has files." The night air at the pier was cooler than it had been all day, but the undercurrent of heat was still there, the kind that came not from the weather but from a crowd that had been fed new information and was hungry for more. Marcus stood near the edge, phone in his hand. The screen paused on retired Chief Howard Ellison's face. Danielle's voice was quiet beside him. "He's not bluffing." Marcus didn't think he was, either. In Ellison's voice there'd been no performance, no hint of someone looking for a late-in-life spotlight. It was the sound of a man who had decided the cost of keeping quiet had finally exceeded the cost of speaking. Within an hour the meeting was set. A small conference room at the county records building. Neutral ground. Sandoval arranged it, making clear in a low voice over the phone that she was doing so off the books for now. "If he's got what he says, it's going to change the temperature fast," she told Marcus. "You might want to brace yourself." Ellison arrived with a weathered leather briefcase that looked like it had been in more rooms than most people's entire careers. His gait was slow, but there was a purpose to each step, like someone who had decided to cross a distance no matter how long it took. He shook Marcus's hand firmly, then Danielle's, and nodded once to Sandoval. When the door shut, Ellison set the case on the table, snapped open the brass latches, and pulled out a stack of manila folders, each with a small blue sticker in the corner. "These," he began, "are reports filed in this county between 2014 and 2020. They all have one thing in common: the caller's name." He tapped the first file. "Whitmore, Carroll." Marcus's eyes flicked to the folder's label. The date was 6 years ago. The location, a public park. The incident, a suspicious male loitering near playground equipment. The description matched a local black schoolteacher who, according to the report, had been sitting on a bench reading while waiting for his niece's soccer game. No charges filed. Ellison slid the next folder forward. This one, same year. Different location. Grocery store parking lot. Caller claimed a black woman was circling cars. Turned out she was looking for a cart return that wasn't blocked. Danielle's fingers curled against the edge of the table. "How many are there?" Ellison's jaw tightened. 7 documented. 2 more we think were hers, but she used a friend's name, and those are just the ones that made it into official reports. Marcus turned over one page after another, the pattern becoming impossible to ignore. The language was always similar: acting aggressive, looking at people suspiciously, might be armed, and each time the description of the suspect fit the same broad template: black in a public space, minding their own business until the police arrived. "This is a pattern of behavior," Marcus said, more to himself than to the room. "Not an isolated mistake." Ellison nodded. "When I was chief, we didn't have a category for this. We didn't want one. We called it erring on the side of caution. But it wasn't caution. It was profiling with plausible deniability." Danielle's voice was sharp. "And you let it happen." Ellison met her gaze without flinching. "I did. I'm telling you because I can't undo it. But I can put it in the hands of someone who might." Sandoval had been quiet until now, scanning the reports with the kind of focus that leaves no detail unturned. "If these are tied together, it's not just civil liability anymore," she said. "It's criminal. False reporting. Bias motivation. You could be looking at a case that tests the statute we've never used." Marcus closed the top folder, the weight of it heavier than paper. "If we take this forward, it's not just about her. It's about creating a precedent that stops the next person before they pick up the phone." Ellison sat back. "Then take it forward. You won't get pushback from me." The next 48 hours moved like a tide hitting every shoreline at once. The documents, once verified by Internal Affairs, were passed to the county prosecutor. A press release confirmed a criminal investigation had been opened into a series of potentially biased and false emergency reports linked to a single individual. The wording was cautious, but the subtext was loud enough to hear without turning up the volume. Social media lit up again. The narrative shifted from "was she wrong" to "how long has she been doing this?" Hashtags resurfaced with sharper edges. Unpattern, not mistake. Charge false 91. The people in those old reports began to speak. The school teacher posted a thread about the day officers approached him at the park. They asked me to stand up, then to put my book down. They asked where my niece was, like I'd stolen her from somewhere. That was 6 years ago. I still don't read in public without scanning every face. The grocery store woman told a local paper, "I thought it was random. Now I know it was her. The fear doesn't feel random anymore." Each story deepened the public outrage. Protest signs changed overnight. "Not her first time, who else is on her list?" Marcus stayed measured in public statements, careful not to taint the case. But privately he saw the opening, the chance to push for a legal precedent that would turn bias-motivated false reporting from a misdemeanor with a fine into a felony with mandatory education requirements and public apology clauses. "If this goes right," he told Danielle, "it could be the law's way of saying, 'We see you, and we're done pretending we don't.'" The investigation accelerated under the pressure. Carol was questioned formally. Her lawyer tried to frame the incidents as overreactions in the context of genuine concern. Prosecutors weren't buying it. The pattern was too clean. 3 days after Ellison's disclosure, the warrant was signed. It happened in daylight, the kind that doesn't let you hide. Carol was still at the resort, staying in a different wing, but walking the same hallways where she'd once smirked from her balcony. The knock came just after noon. 2 uniformed officers, body cams blinking, stood in the doorway. "Carol Whitmore?" one asked.
Yes.
"You're under arrest for multiple counts of false reporting, with bias motivation." Her lawyer, who had been in the room, started to speak, but the officer continued. "You have the right to remain silent." Guests stopped to watch from the corridor. Phones lifted. Somewhere down the hall a child asked what was happening, and a parent whispered an answer too low to catch. Marcus heard about it from Sandoval before it hit the news feeds. "It's happening now," she said. "And I thought you should know, they're walking her out through the main lobby." By the time he reached the edge of the boardwalk, she was already being escorted toward the resort entrance, wrists cuffed in front of her, flanked by officers. The same glass doors she had breezed through on check-in now framed her exit in front of a half-circle of cameras. Some guests stared, some whispered, others just watched as the woman whose call had set this entire chain in motion stepped into the back of a patrol car. The red and blue lights flashed against the white stucco walls, the same lights that had once reflected off Marcus's sunglasses on that first day. As the car door closed, a voice from the crowd shouted, "She's not the only one." Marcus turned toward the sound and saw a man in a resort staff uniform, holding up a folded piece of paper. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "You need to see this," he said, eyes locking on Marcus. "It's about the others." The staffer's paper, creased, damp at the corners from a palm that wouldn't stop sweating, turned out to be a list. Not just names, but dates, room numbers, and terse notations. "Called on for trespassing at pool. Asked to re-verify reservation," followed by "security to elevator." Most entries ended with the same 4-word summary: "No incident. Guest compliant." It wasn't a ledger of crimes, it was a catalog of suspicion, kept quietly by a night shift clerk who'd started recording patterns because he didn't know what else to do with the knot in his stomach. Those pages threaded into Ellison's files, into Kenna's note, into Trevor's stream, until the story stretched beyond Carol and wrapped its fingers around a system that had practiced being careful, until careful became cruel. The prosecutor folded it all into a case that made new law stand up straighter. Carol pled to multiple counts of false reporting with bias motivation. The judge imposed not only fines and probation, but mandatory community education. Hours logged in rooms where she wasn't the authority, where "I felt unsafe" wasn't permitted as evidence. No cameras were there when she first spoke to a class of high schoolers. Voice thin, hands trembling. Someone later said it was the first time she used the sentence Maya had demanded. "I was wrong." The resort installed brighter lights and newer cameras, and more importantly scrapped unwritten policies about double-checking. They published a pledge with metrics and dates, and this time people believed it just enough to watch closely. Months turned like a wheel catching on the same spoke, until the wood smoothed. When the invitation came from the House Judiciary Committee, the letterhead looked the way these moments always do: formal, Embossed, faintly theatrical. Marcus read it at the kitchen table, coffee steaming into the winter air, and set it down with care, as if the paper had weight he couldn't spill. They want me to say the thing I've been saying for years, he told Danielle, half a smile, half a warning. She touched his wrist and said the words they'd both learned to trust. Say it like you don't need them to clap. The hearing chamber was cold enough to make breath look honest. The days held faces arranged into practiced expressions. Concern, skepticism, calculation. Cameras blinked like patient insects. Marcus raised his right hand for the oath and felt the old steadiness return. Not the stillness of fear, but the kind that comes from telling the truth so often it fits your mouth like a home. He didn't bring outrage to the mic. He brought order. Bias can be a spark, he began, voice even, but 911 can be the bellows. If we let feelings masquerade as facts, we manufacture emergencies. We put armed people between a family and their front door because someone's discomfort dialed 3 digits. He described Ocean View, but only enough to give shape to what matters when a call comes in. Specific observations, corroboration, de-escalation questions that force callers to examine their own certainty. Fear is a data point, he said again, and the sentence landed with the kind of quiet that means people are taking notes. Some members nodded. One pressed in, voice smooth. Chief Wilson, aren't you worried that criminalizing callers will deter good faith reporting? He answered without flinch. Our proposal doesn't criminalize reporting. It penalizes knowingly false or identity-based reports. We pair teeth with training, cheaper than litigation, kinder than ignoring harm, smarter than pretending this is just about feelings. He held the room long enough to let the nuance sit. Unexpected twist arrived 2 seats down from him. Lieutenant Sandoval, invited to testify as a local law enforcement voice, set her hands on the table and said, "We failed that morning, procedurally and morally. When we let a caller's fear define our posture, we've retrained dispatch, we've disciplined where appropriate, and we've made policy where there was once a shrug. I'm here to ask you to give us the framework to do it everywhere, not just where a viral video forces it." Cameras cut to her chest cam clipped to a civilian blazer, a symbol and a promise, both. Further down the witness table sat retired Chief Ellison, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, but never looked truer. He read 3 paragraphs, then put the paper aside and looked the days straight on. "This isn't about catching bad apples," he said. "It's about depriving the barrel of the oxygen that lets rot spread. If you want to know what accountability looks like for men like me, it looks like standing next to the people we once told to slow down and saying, 'You were right to pull.'" Someone in the gallery exhaled the way people do when they hear a door hinge finally oiled. Not all questions came clean. A congressman tried to wedge in both sides, asked whether officers should be punished when a caller's fear turns out to be justified later. Marcus didn't give the wedge a place to rest. "The standard cannot be retroactive luck," he said. "It must be present tense facts." A congresswoman asked about training modules and budgets. He gave her numbers and names. When asked what success looks like, he said, "Fewer guns drawn, fewer children learning the choreography of survival, more calls ending in nothing at all." The bill, Equal Emergency Integrity Act, found a co-sponsor across the aisle, not because the times were noble, but because a staffer's grandmother had seen Go Home smeared on her TV and said, "We didn't risk all this for little boys to still be brave." The act proposed penalties calibrated to intent and pattern, funding for dispatcher training, and a mandate for external review when body cams blinked off at the exact wrong time. It wasn't perfect. It was possible. After the hearing, cameras formed their familiar half-circle. Marcus answered the questions that added light and skipped the ones engineered for heat. A young journalist asked, "What do you say to people who think the worst is behind us?" He thought of the note under the door, of tomorrow on the glass, of a family mourning turned into a tactical response. "The worst doesn't travel on a calendar," he said. "It rides on habits. We break habits on purpose." Carol served her sentence mostly out of view. There were no live shots of court-mandated workshops, no breaking news segments about quietly sitting at the back of rooms where other people spoke. Word traveled anyway. Someone sent Danielle a photo. Carol at a long table in a community center, eyes red, hands flat, a white index card in front of her. 3 times I mistook fear for fact. Danielle didn't forward it. She tucked the image away with others that weren't for public use. Ayana's face the first morning after. Caleb's hand pressed to the balcony glass under the smeared word. Marcus's silhouette in the TV's reflection as he steadied the nation into listening. Spring shrugged into early summer. The resort sent an invitation for the Wilsons to return, but not as a PR stunt. Kenna wrote it herself. Come as guests, not as proof. They said yes, not to perform, but to practice what they had said out loud, that leaving had never been the point. They arrived on a morning that tried its best to be ordinary. The check-in desk had new signage about non-discrimination and body cam policy for off-duty officers hired by the property. The concierge handed out room keys and sunscreen with the same neutral cheer. A plaque near the elevator, small unbragging, described a guest pledge co-written with staff and community groups. None of it fixed the past. All of it held the present slightly better. Ellen was there, of course, a wicker basket of lemon muffins on her arm like a tradition hardening into ritual. She hugged Danielle long and uncomplicated, thumped Marcus on the shoulder, told the kids their growth inches like she had measured them last week. The water's warmer than it looks, she said, which is another way to say the day could be saved. They walked the boardwalk in a line that shifted the way families do. Someone lingering, someone leaping ahead, a parent drifting outward, then back in. The tide had pulled far, leaving a broad stretch of sand, stippled with tiny shells that crunched like sugar. Ayana squinted at the horizon, then at her phone, then put the phone away. Caleb carried a battered football and pretended not to look for someone to throw it to. The pier was busy, kids dropping lines into water they couldn't see the bottom of, a guitarist working 3 chords into something soothing. A poster from the Winters Forum had faded to the color of old denim. Ask for facts, not fear. It fluttered once and then lay still, as if finally allowed to rest. On the beach, a new detail. A small group of local officers in shorts and department t-shirts, participating in a volunteer surf clinic for neighborhood kids. Lieutenant Sandoval, off-duty, balanced awkwardly on a board too small for pride and laughed when she toppled into foam. Ortiz stood next to a folding table labeled Dispatch Careers, walking a teenager through a flowchart of questions that began with "What do you see?" and did not include "How do you feel?" She looked up, saw Marcus, and lifted a hand. Not a salute, not deference. Respect, plain as sand. They found their old spot near the pier pilings. Danielle spread the blanket, slapped the corners so it hugged the ground, and set down a basket like a flag. No one stared. Some nodded. One man, linen shirt now finally wrinkled, tipped a bottle of water in their direction and then returned to his book. A small correction for a memory that had lingered too long. They did not give speeches to the air. They ate strawberries. They argued about sunscreen. Caleb begged to go out past the sandbar. Danielle gave him a radius like a math problem. Ayana gathered shells and let the ones with chips be beautiful anyway. Marcus sat in the shallow edge, where waves pooled before hurrying away. Jeans rolled, ankles wet, hands braced behind him. He watched the same pair of birds draft each other, just above the water, trading the lead without ceremony. He let breath find a speed that matched the tide. A little boy he did not know ran by with a kite, and shouted, simply, "Hey!" The greeting held no agenda. Marcus lifted a hand, "Hey, back," and felt something unclench so quietly it might have been a muscle. No one names. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, the one he used for thoughts he didn't want to trust to pixels, and wrote 3 lines. Facts first. Cameras on. Keep standing. He tore the page out, folded it, and slid it into his wallet behind a faded note from his mother. You are not what they call you. You are what you answer to. The sun kept doing its unpaid work. Danielle stretched out on the blanket and closed her eyes. Ayana and Caleb waded deeper, shrieking when water found the backs of their knees. Their voices braided with the surf until sound became a single color. Marcus stood, finally, and stepped forward until the water took his calves, then his shins, then cooled the place where the day had burned hottest. 5 minutes, he called, because fathers have jobs no policy can automate. The kids waved acknowledgement, large enough to count as compliance. He watched them cut across the face of a small wave, and thought of the word that had haunted their glass. Tomorrow. It could be a threat. It could be a promise. It could be a place you make by insisting on it. He let the water tug his ankles once, twice, and chose, as Ayana and Caleb dove through the next curl of water, and burst up laughing. Marcus lifted his eyes to the line where sea swallowed sky, and understood the fight would call again. Next week, next season, in some other voice that mistook comfort for law. He didn't feel finished. He felt ready, watching his children claim the waves that tried to push them back, and believing with a steadiness that would carry, that every step forward was worth the one it took to make it. Stories like Marcus Wilson's aren't just headlines, they're warnings. The next call, the next beach, the next family could be yours or someone you love. Know the signs. Question the fear. Because change doesn't wait for permission, and neither should you.